And we are live. This is Dark Journalists. What a fantastic crowd we have out there in the ideas room already tonight. And of course, I'm joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, wow, just incredible. This has got to be one of the most powerful episodes and ways to start the year. But to do it on the heels of the Supreme Court deal, and to do it on the heels of all the failures of Stepford Biden is rather remarkable. And it plays right into that because the alternate working title of this episode, X-117, well, the actual title is UFO Neocons, which we're going to get into tonight and describe who those people are and what they're doing, suddenly embracing on a political level the UFO file through this term UAP, which is a flimsy term that they just threw out there to remarket the whole thing as part of the Clinton-Tom DeLonge nexus. But one of the interesting things that came up in all this was the disclosure precedent, and we're going to see how important that is tonight. The other piece of this episode is X-Protect goes public. X-Protect, something we've pointed out here on this show many times, the origin of a secrecy group that's dedicated to keeping all the developments around the UFO file completely secret, and will use sort of discrediting means to accomplish that. Obfuscation means, pulling the media, judges, legislative means, behind-the-scenes shenanigans, and finally, a lethal means. So if they run into a situation where they encounter, say, a Morris Jessup type who has sort of spotless credentials and is nailing it and is bringing in, you know, the kind of Philadelphia experiment style technology to the public mixed with the UFO thing. And that's, you know, we're talking 1957, 1958. You just remove a guy like that, just get him out of the way. And about 98% of the time, they're concerned with discrediting or, you know, kind of pivoting and getting that person's public image all tangled up. So we're going to be getting into that tonight as well. This group is active. It's something we've identified since we started the X series here. And it is counterbalanced by a separate group, which we've referred to on this program as X-Share. And that group is dedicated to moving the culture forward in a way that includes profound advances in technology, consciousness of, you know, man's place in the universe and humanity's place in the world. So these types of groups are really coming out of the closet, and right in the heart of it, when we look at it from a political level, is the deep state side, of course, but right in the middle of that is the Central Intelligence Agency, which has grown to such incredible proportions that it's hardly possible, you know, if you read some of those early exposés from like the 60s and 70s, and I want to do a big shout out for Professor Scott's birthday. He's 93 years old today. And of course, Professor Scott coined the deep state, has appeared on this program many times, and has a huge influence on my own thinking. But, you know, Professor Scott was writing about this stuff. You move like from 1968 onwards, and you think, could somebody imagine they're writing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s? You know, actually, his best book came out in 2014, so he's still writing great work. But can you go back there and see some of those early researchers, those kind of May Brussel types? And so many of them were on the left, because it was the left that was really seeing this rise of the military-industrial complex. And then it was the neocons that subverted that, because the neocons originally started in the Democratic Party and hopped over to the Republican Party. Republican Party used to be the isolationist party. They wouldn't go near any war or anything. And then the neocons, which were in the Democratic Party, which loved to go to war, jumped over into the Republican Party. And then the Republican Party wanted to go to war, and the Democrats were against them. So it was very interesting war machine posturing. But in the final analysis, you know, we have to remember when we go into some of the deeper Central Intelligence philosophy, is that there is no truth. So however they can accomplish their aim is all they care about. So there is no truth. Let's remember that. That's their mentality, which is why they seem to lie so easily, especially when we get into the UFO file area. It's a lot of shades of gray. And so we have some really kind of fantastic operators, really good liars in that space. And up until 2017, none of them ever admitted their UFO status, their intelligence status working around the UFO file. They kept that pretty well hidden, and it was always revealed later, or not at all. They would maintain denying it till the end, till their dying breath and their deathbed. But what happened was, over time, they decided, oh, look, this thing is out there. UFOs are the top Google search for 2018. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to basically take over the entire issue. And the way we're going to do it is through the political machines, and we're not going to have to do it in the background operating as X-Protect. We're going to take part of this public, and we're going to show a public face of it. And the way that public face will work is it'll always be a nonstop misinformation machine, which will help us attain our goals. And they've been studying this now for over 75 years. So on the government side, that's a very small group that's operating. And X-Protect operates inside the shadowy corridor between the aerospace companies and the intelligence agencies. So it has a public-private function. The private function definitely with the aerospace companies, which is where the UFO file and the UFO information originally went. And the idea was, hey, it won't be subject to any FOIA requests. There won't be any public trail. But then when those companies started to not play ball anymore, the government decided, oh, I need to try to get that back under the window of executive power. So this is where we find ourselves about 1959, and then flash forward to 2022, and that battle has been taking place for a long time. It's included the death of presidents, opposition, taking down of high political leaders, stripping the functions, inflating the military-industrial complex. And, whenever someone says to you, well, these two political parties, they really don't get along, the right and the left, it's gridlock and all that stuff, just remember, every year they sign on to an $800 billion military defense budget for a country that's not at war at all. And there's no peep out of either party for how bloated that defense budget is. There's no Democrats out there saying, stop, it's too inflated. All the Democrats love it. All the Republicans, hey, the Republicans, they're supposed to be good at not spending money, right? The Republicans love to spend that money. And this year in the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which is where all that money gets allocated, and which Joe Biden signed on to, stepped for Biden, and he really, this week, he's really had some short circuiting. The guy really looked like he was short, a couple of beers short of a six pack. When he comes before the press and he's talking, for them not to call out the kind of misfiring that's going on a cerebral edge, is just kind of fascinating. Where are they going with this? Are they going to, what if he just stops talking in the middle of a press conference as he has? What are they going to do? Hustle him away? So there's some real cognitive issues going on there. And I think that Biden and his condition really gets right to the core of this. But the NDAA this year contains something it's never contained before. One of the things it always has contained since the September 11th attacks is a little provision called September 11th Emergency. And that gives them the ability to suspend everything and go into COG at any time under the September 11th emergency, and it brings NORTHCOM in here to control the United States. Now, they activated COG on September 11th, in fact, but the September 11th emergency legislation gives them the ability to do a number of things, kind of wireless wiretap type things, and operate under an emergency condition, which, as you can see, does not exist. But the emergency powers becomes kind of the central struggle in our democracy right now, and this is where we're at. And placed right in the middle of that NDAA was this little provision about a group called the ASRO. And this was the new UFO group put forward by a couple of interesting, strange bedfellows, I would say, or an odd couple, as it were. And that odd couple would be Marco Rubio and Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator from New York, who's a Democrat, while Rubio is a hardcore Republican and a neocon to the core, as Hillary Clinton is, who is the big sponsor of Gillibrand. So you can see we have our hands full tonight because we're going to do a deep dive into that odd couple and see where the kind of flighty characters on top, like Lou Elizondo, Lou, fits in. And how does that push around the UFO file? Where are they going with it? And how dangerous that situation is. Because if you thought the COVID op was fun with all the mandates, lockdowns, and fascist activity, just wait till they get to the UFO invasion threat op. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We are going to go deep tonight in X Series 117. This is UFO Neocons. X-Protect goes public. President disclosure? Question mark. We're going to be taking your questions in the second half of the program, and Miss Olivia's putting those together anytime. So how's the temperature out there?
It is excellent. Let me see if I can get this right. Mitakuye Oyasin wants to know, can you ask DJ what he thinks about Biden building a concrete wall around the White House?
This is very strange, and that's a true report. And, they had all this going on after the January 6th nonsense last year when the FBI got some Trump supporters to walk through Congress. You remember that? And they called it the insurrection of the century. That's all a lot of nonsense. However, they installed the National Guard there, and they had all of that metal fencing and barbed wire and all the rest. So this was meant to be a new extension of that, but it's concrete. And they're just building this kind of, compound around the White House, which is disturbing. There's so many things that are disturbing about the Biden White House. In fact, when you get into it, one of the most amazing things is that, this guy sits there and he changes the background of the White House because he doesn't actually want to do his addresses to the public from the White House. He wants to do it from a soundstage, and they have a green screen for the White House. So sometimes back there you'll see snow falling. Other times you'll see shipping containers or weird stuff like that. Or sometimes a rose garden in the middle of winter, So it gets very strange and into kind of, comic novel territory. But what the wall is for, I think it's more of that posturing around Americans are terrorists. And they want to get Biden with his 28% approval rating and the really horrible record around inflation and jobs and everything else. So the country's in a tailspin. The inflation's through the roof, the highest percentage since 1982. And in 1982, we were coming out of massive recession. So the inflationary numbers would be totally different now. We were supposed to have that problem under control 40 years ago. So for them to bring it back on purpose, by forcing these companies through mandates and stuff, which got struck down by the Supreme Court, to really make their workers go through all of these cartwheels in order to just show up for work. You're destroying your own economy and the small business economy on purpose. So you have to wonder, what are they up to? Why would they want to destroy their own economy? In order to replace it with something else, no doubt. But the creature that they're trying to replace it with isn't ready yet. So all of this seems very out of sorts. And we're going to get into that tonight because there's a huge economic piece to this UFO file thing. And I want to say right up front on the UFO piece, and this is crucial, which is, people from all walks of life have had different encounters with UFOs, with occupants, and everything else. And that's been going on with humanity for a long time. It's the story of your grandfather, great-grandfather, father and mother. I mean, they all know somebody who's connected with this in some way. So a lot of what's been happening in the modern era depends tremendously on this X technology, which they've kept so well hidden through groups like X-Protect. And that's not just to say, these are UFOs from another planet coming here and visiting us. There's an off-world visitor aspect to this, there's no question. But probably the majority of what we're seeing in relation to this has to, have an address like Lockheed Martin or Boeing to it because of the nature of how these things are pursued. Even the abduction scenario, of course, with the MILABs are easily imitated by, military encounters and brainwashing and everything like that. Now, you cannot describe all of them like that. There are many cases, I've met many contactees. It's too rich in the American experience to deny. You cannot deny it. So wherever it is that these encounters are coming from, whether it's interdimensional or off-world, they certainly are happening. I'm just saying there's a great job in there to imitate them. There's a lot of profit motive. There's a lot of power motive. And there's also the ultimate motive of promoting the UFO threat, which we're going to get into tonight. So we have to kind of keep our perspective as we go that this is a real phenomena. And so that when we make fun of the actors from the CIA who are coming forward with false Central Intelligence Agency disclosure, that's totally different than people who've come forward with real stories, or pilots who have come forward with excellent sightings and things that have changed their lives. The Betty and Barney Hill story being the classic kind of, Columbus case, really the benchmark case in ufology for abductions, and just that incredible history of people witnessing this phenomena. That deserves to be really well investigated and understood as part of the experience. It has nothing to do with seeing through the mirage that the Central Intelligence Agency. The Central Intelligence Agency's goal right now is to create a false UFO threat, and they've been on this case for a long time. And unfortunately, the UFO field is so desperate for some recognition, for some approval from the government and the media, that they have gone along with it, so that people that you could depend on in the field to call these things out have instead been like, where do I sign up for the TV show? And, if you get on a TV show, that's a good thing. That's nice. But you can't throw your credentials out the window for that. I'm fond of saying in this program, in research and in journalism, if you're in the truth-telling business, you either tell the truth or get out of the business. It's a pretty simple equation. There's lots of places where you can go and lie and make a good living. Wall Street is one of them. Hollywood's another. So those jobs are waiting for you. But I think when it comes to this, when we get into journalism and we think about what it is that we're trying to do, we're trying to get all sides of the story and find that really narrow corner down the middle, which is the truth to any subject. And so when you have groups like the CIA who control the media, and we've seen that up close, through a number of different people and colleagues and stories over the years, the CIA controls the media because they have the most access to stories all around the world. So, they can really make or break somebody's career on the journalistic side. But when you think about this whole question about how do you get that truth out, if you find yourselves going along, like let's suppose in the case of Kirsten Gillibrand, she put this whole amendment together to put into the NDAA around the UAP UFO issue. And so now instead of questioning this person, we have people in the UFO field begging, to try to see if they can't get some of the coattails of what she's done. So they don't want to interview her and ask any hard questions. They just want to kind of kiss around the whole thing. And, and you have a lot of fluff in the field. That's just the nature of it. There's a lot of entertainment around alternative subjects and the UFO file in particular. That's fine. There's no problem with entertainment, but there's entertainment and there's journalism, and they're not the same thing. So, when we have a show like Ancient Aliens, and I always say this about Ancient Aliens, it's, really, it's about as edgy as the Home Shopping Network at this point. And, you're not going to find anything solid there. It's just kind of fun to watch all the graphics and stuff. But when they did these shows, they had these Congress people on. And so now all these Congress people want to be part of the UFAP wave, right? It's the UFO wave. And UFAP is this name that they just want to attach to it. But what is it that they are being told? They know that there's some cash cow, some power play involved, or they wouldn't care. They would never attach their names to it in a million years. And Gillibrand in particular, I think, is important, which is why we're going to go through this through the figure of Senator Gillibrand tonight. Senator Gillibrand, who has been touted as a presidential, she actually was a very major presidential contender at the beginning of 2020 and dropped out rather suddenly. We're going to see why. Of course, Marco Rubio, or Little Marco, as Trump likes to call him, right there in Florida in the hot zone and the Space Coast. He has a lot of strange bedfellows, including Gillibrand. That odd couple is fascinating, but also Bill Nelson, who, again, on the Democratic side, but becomes the leader of NASA. So, you know, when he was running for senator against the former governor down there, Marco wouldn't give the governor any support, which is really, really strange. So there's a lot of strings being pulled. Let's take a look at the string masters. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 117, the UFO Neocons. X Protect goes public. I want to remind you before we get started in earnest to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for the newsletter. It keeps us in touch under the extraordinary, and I mean extraordinary censorship. Okay, here's a quick update. My interview from last year with Millie Weaver, the InfoWars reporter who went on her own and did some fantastic documentary work, got pulled after a year on several platforms. So figure that one out, figure out that kind of coordination. The only thing I can think to do is to get Millie back on and figure out what on earth it was that they were so afraid of her talking about. But these are the types of conditions that we find ourselves in here at the beginning of 2022. That leadership has an aspect of panic to it because they're trying too many ops at the same time. And the worldwide pharma op is a very dangerous one. But the UFO one requires a lot of setting up as well. And I think that they just cannot afford to have any truth tellers out there on that level. And so we continue to walk between the raindrops on this one. And we're going to continue to do that. But the best way to make sure that we stay in touch is to sign up for that newsletter. It's a free newsletter, and it keeps us in touch about once a week. Every Friday, you're going to get some notices of some incredible X-Series episodes that we have coming up for you, as well as some remarkable interviews as well. And you know there's some great interviews on tap for January. And with that, before I launch in, Miss Olivia, how you doing?
Great. Jennifer says, isn't Gillibrand connected with Nexium cult through family?
Oh, just wait. Just wait. This is an interesting aspect, which is both Rubio and Gillibrand have very blackmailable dossiers, you could say. And that, I think, may be one of the keys as to why they're positioned right there. Another one I've noticed that they've been positioning is this Galejo character from Arizona, and he suddenly discovered that he had all these Latin roots. And he had a totally different name when he was over here at Harvard, and he was studying special psychological operations and crowd control. So this guy now is the lead, one of the lead figures as well. And his wife, and now it's his former wife, but she's the mayor of Phoenix. So we have all kinds of interesting things going on there on the political side.
Let me ask you another question. Luke Walker wants to know, question for DJ. Does DJ believe Gary McKinnon's findings when he hacked NASA about the ships?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, all of his findings have turned out over time to be way ahead of their time. So you're looking at the original stuff that he brought forward maybe around 2002, 2003. And so the off-world officers list is one of the most compelling pieces of information that he brought forward because, you know, we're accustomed to that with the Navy, Navy officers list, or with the Army and the Marines. But off-world, you know, we just have some astronauts and technicians. I mean, you're not supposed to have an off-world officers list. And that's what got us, so many of us, into the secret space program research. And McKinnon stood by it. And the thing was, you know, you might say, oh, McKinnon just made it up or whatever. Look, this guy was in the UK and Obama went over there to check on his status. All right. And then during the press conference, they noted, hey, while you were over here, you checked up on his status. Okay. That's really interesting. That means they wanted to get this guy, you know, and we've seen what they do when they get their man, like in the case of Assange, for example. You just put him in solitary confinement and, you know, you try to break them basically and try to get all the secrets. And in the case of Assange, it's kind of an international outrage that this is going on. And it's the fact that America is taking part in it. I know that the pardon of Assange came up for Trump at the very end, and I think that he took a full swing and a miss there because he didn't go for it. And I think it could have been a historical decision to alleviate Julian Assange and WikiLeaks of the problem of extradition here to the United States. So we have some serious issues there, but in the case of McKinnon, there's no question at all that he had read this, and also that he talked about these programs like Solar Warden, etc. So we know that there are deep programs associated with off-world development. The question is, since 1972, the United States has not sent a man to the moon. This is really kind of unusual if you think about it. I mean, how do you stop a manned space program for 50 years and then say, we're going to pick it back up? And then in the case of Mike Pence, being Trump's VP, when he puts back together the Space Council and all that stuff, which has been sitting there since Dan Quayle, to have a mind or to destroy a mind is being very wasteful. Quayle was something, but Harris, she makes Quayle look like Einstein.
Well, I don't know about that, but they're definitely two peas in the pod.
Unbelievable. The thing is, it is very interesting, this question around keeping the secret, because they've been really good at that. As a matter of fact, you're going to find through all of those different developments that whether it was Quayle and the Space Council in 1990, or some of the Clinton maneuvers with Lawrence Rockefeller, they were all after this UFO file aspect. Of course, Reagan with SDI's Star Wars, and so much of that, Jimmy Carter with his own sighting, and then with confronting various aspects of government. And, all of that's on record. We know that these people were very interested in it. Nixon's deep history with it being part of CIA Blue Book. And it's so funny to me that a lot of researchers on the UFO side, they do TV shows and all this stuff about Blue Book and all the rest of it. But, anything that's on the record in relation to the UFO file, it's only things that kind of slip through that are of any value. So to do, all these shows and, TV series about Blue Book was pretty weak, because Blue Book was always a whitewash to start with. CIA Blue Book is the thing to be after. And there are trails, and we've brought forward some of those right here on this program. So we'll see if we can get into that tonight. All right. If you got anything else, now is the time.
David Frank says, did they just gut a NASA bill and insert SNEAK, an agenda that has nothing to do with NASA?
Well, NASA has been getting the short shrift for a while. But what's interesting is the thing that I noticed, SNEAK is interesting. But the thing that really grabbed me was that we were reimbursing Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos, the billionaire's company. And he was getting all this money through the government for his space exploration. This is a guy who really does not need any more money. So, that shows where the bootlicking is going on. All right. Let's get oriented with what I'm saying, because when I say to you that the CIA has invaded the UFO field, I want to prove that to you, as I've done in this program. Here's a quick recap. All right, in 2017, the Tom DeLonge effort around the To the Stars Academy was supposed to bring disclosure out of the shadows, and he was like, "Oh, these government people are talking to me." Later, he would say, "Oh, I lied about that just to get people to pay attention to my project." But there were a lot of CIA people around that project who decided we can really use this guy, in fact. So right off the bat, he enlisted as his partner someone named Jim Semivan. And what he says there in that tweet is very compelling. He says, "My partner, Jim Semivan, is a spy. Meet him." Jim Semivan, CIA veteran and intelligence specialist, VP of Operations for the To the Stars Academy, spent 25 years in the Central Intelligence Agency's Directorate of Operations. That's the top. You don't get any higher than that in the CIA. So this guy, 25 years at the top level of the Central Intelligence Agency. So that by the time we get to, 2015, he's never been on record as a person. He's not a person. And that's how it works with intelligence. So as an individual, he doesn't exist until 2015. That's how secret his work was. And I'm sure, there are many things involved with his career that would be fascinating on a counterintelligence side. The only thing that interests me is that he was being part of this UFO threat activity and being closely tied in with creating this to the Stars Academy, which had DeLong as what they call in CIA parlance a bobo. And the bobo is somebody that you put out there. It's usually a celebrity or someone with a lot of notoriety. And then when the op goes wrong, you unplug and the bobo is out there to take, like a piñata, all the shots. And I would say in the case, there's a constant attempt to resurrect the DeLong aspect of this. And now they're saying, oh, we're going to do it through entertainment because it failed so miserably through the traditional channels. But they did a lot, and I mean a lot, to really create this CIA op in the media. And the New York Times running the Lou Elizondo thing, Lou Elizondo being part of DeLong's operation, Semivan, the 25-year CIA veteran, creating the entire operation. I mean, this is deep. But then if you go deeper into the TTSA executive board, you would find over 100 years of executive experience, 100 years CIA experience on the executive board. So it's a CIA op on record. That's not just something dark journalists thought up. That's on record. They admit that. So why were the CIA so suddenly interested in pushing the UFO file after denying it for years? As a matter of fact, they came out in 2014 and they created a Twitter account. And one of the first things they put up there was something that said, remember all those sightings of UFOs in the 50s, 60s, and 70s? That was us testing out spy aircraft. Ha ha. There are no UFOs. So up until right around there, they were still on a different track. Something shifted, and we're going to get into where that shift took place. And it was right around the 2016 election and the advent of Trump and the attempt of Hillary saying, I can lead this UFO threat operation. And that's where you get Podesta and all that crud. But of course, it goes back a lot further, but we're just going to use this kind of modern piece. So an interesting thing happened with DeLong's company, which is instantly it started to sink financially. And when you get around the UFO field, you might find like MUFON's budget, for example, would be something like maybe $3 million a year, something like that. These are the types of numbers that you see in the UFO field. There are conferences, there are books, this kind of stuff. But it's generally, pretty marginal figures. Here we go. Tom DeLong's UFO organization has a $37.4 million deficit. That was in 2018, according to the SEC. That number swelled up to 50 million before TTSA sort of went south. So these are facts that are on record. That company sinks into $50 million in debt. The CIA is behind it, and their whole thing is, let's get UFO disclosure. So they create a TV show, which I'm convinced that they paid the History Channel to run because it showed up in over 52nd to 53rd place in its slot. It was not a very popular show, and there was no reason for them to grant it a second season, for example. But these are the things that happened. And in central to it, after they took DeLong out of the driver's seat in all this, was the promotion of Lou Elizondo as a whistleblower. He's a CIA whistleblower who supposedly was in charge of the UFO file and just could not stand that, his superiors wouldn't take him seriously. And so the program ends in 2012, and then he quits in 2017. So there's a 5-year gap in his outrage. As people have put on the record, and we've put on the record here, Lou lied in public over and over again, but was rewarded with big slots on CNN, Fox, and all these other things, GQ Hero of the Year and all this wonderful stuff. So he had that kind of, he was in with the in crowd on the CIA side. And then he could constantly be saying, you know what, I am being, pushed around because I'm a whistleblower and my job is in jeopardy and, my earning potential's gone and all this stuff. So now he has a big book deal and he has a movie on HBO coming out about his life and all the rest. But this whole thing about Elizondo was a setup from the beginning. It was a structure, it was a construct. And they created a legend around this idea of a person who was a whistleblower. He has nothing in common with any whistleblower. In fact, he still works for the government. So a number of people on the UFO side decided, we're not going to ask him any questions. We're just going to, kind of roll out the red carpet and let this guy pretend to be whoever he wants to be. And so some of the key people in ufology suddenly embraced this guy, even though he was CIA, even though it was intelligence, counterintelligence, worked for James Clapper, worked for John Brennan, really hardcore directors of intelligence who really manipulated things, like drone wars in Afghanistan, for example. So we found ourselves in a weird situation there because the field that would usually kind of, go in and investigate and really get to the core of this and ask the tough questions was nowhere to be found because they all wanted to be part of the kind of celebrity aspect of the whole thing. And the regular mainstream media either didn't know enough or were just under instructions not to ask any tough questions. So suddenly, anytime you saw the word UFO, it would be associated with Lou and that really bad Tic Tac image that was supposedly gun footage, which we know is actually footage that just showed up on YouTube in 2007 and was not any part of, any secret operation or anything like that. And there's a lot of people who just say the footage is faked anyway. You have real good footage of UFOs. There's good footage of UFOs in New Zealand from 1978 by a film crew, so forget about the Tic Tac. So that stuff already existed. It's just they didn't want to do anything about it then. But they wanted to create this whole operation. And it was interesting because right after that came the pandemic. And so when the pandemic hit and people were inside and ordered inside through lockdown, what they did was they rolled out the whole op all over again that had failed through the New York Times, the videos and everything else in 2017. Here it was a couple years later and they were like, everybody's home, let's try this again. So they really get afraid and we can roll out the UFO threat op and lose a whistleblower. So they really hung in there for a long time. Now, the neocon aspect to this is very important because you started to see in the last year really hardcore neocons start to sign on to the UFO threat idea, which Lou had been out there banging away at trying to create a threat idea. So the person who got him and really kind of promoted him out there was Christopher Mellon, who had worked in defense intelligence under Clinton and under W. And he came from the Mellon banking family. And, so he had those tremendous connections financially and on the intelligence side. So he came out and he became kind of Lou's patron saint. And this was another very strange, mysterious, I guess the theme tonight is odd couples when you think about it. So we have the odd couple of Gillibrand and Rubio, now Mellon and Elizondo. We have another one. I'm going to refer to a third. So the neocon aspect starts to creep its way into the political spectrum. We start to notice the UAP, UFO thing being used as a football around politics suddenly. Now, this is not something that we had really seen. It had come up, say, in the 60s, actually. There were huge Senate hearings around UFOs because you'd have things like incredible sightings over Michigan. And in the 50s, they had some also. They had some really remarkable waves, and there were hints that there were going to be governmental activity. They would say, oh, we're announcing Blue Book, we're going to look into it, and all the rest. And by the 70s, you already had a conceptual piece, but it was in entertainment, which was all about Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That was another kind of disclosure operation. They were ready to go, and they had set up the movies and the books and everything else. They were kind of just getting into it, and they backed off. And in the 80s, again, another one. Through Reagan and through Bobby Inman, the CIA director, or deputy CIA director, he started to leak things out. And they had the movie E.T. And again, the late 80s. So that's when you get into the Bob Lazar period of the right around 1990, 89, 90 in that period. And that's when Area 51 and those things start to come out. So this trail of leading up to something and trying to put together the proper op in order to create a UFO threat aspect to the public and get all of the associated powers emergency powers associated with that and financial powers, which the Central Intelligence Agency are expert at. This is what they were building up, but none of these ops seem to really do it for them. Or they may have just been kind of a consistent loop laying down the groove over time, because also people were learning more and more about the subject. So that gets us into where the political neocon aspect brings in. And this is the part, this is really the century of the UFO neocon, but particularly the decade that we're in right now. Because what they're trying to do is create a political situation where there's a UFO threat and we need a military response to it, which requires a whole corridor of power. And just like you have to surrender all your rights because there's a health crisis, and you have to surrender all your rights because there's terrorists, and you have to surrender all your rights because Russia is such a big threat. Well, when they have the UFO threat, that's something on a completely different level, because you're dealing with shocking people culturally, religiously, spiritually, the whole thing, politically. You've got kind of the perfect storm there. So they need to perfect that story before they roll that one out. Now, you see attempts in the Trump administration to reel back in the power of the UFO file back under presidential control. We hadn't seen that kind of an effort really since the Kennedy administration. There's some effort in the Reagan administration, but there's too many CIA people at a high political level in that administration for him to get a real handle on it, and he was aging rapidly. But again, compared to Stepford Biden, he was like Einstein. And Reagan, there were enough advisors around Reagan who knew how to implement the things, his general principles. All right, so Lou, who we've been talking about, started to, sometime around the formation of this UAP task force in the last year, float the idea that he was going to run for Congress. I'm going to Congress, he says. This is an unusual thing for a UFO whistleblower. What do you have to do with Congress? No, says Lou. Congress or bust. Threatens to run for Congress if Pentagon UFO report watered down. Well, it was a watered down report. Of course, they didn't say anything in that report in June, but Lou didn't run for Congress, but he floated it out there. He was looking for backing, and it didn't happen. But it did happen in other places. All right, so let's look at some neocon strange familiars, or odd couples, as it were. There's the odd couple I mentioned of Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo. Mellon, really think about Mellon, the Ivy League, really kind of hardcore intel figure. And then Lou, the CIA interrogator guy. It's an odd mix. And, it's kind of like those photos, too, that you see a lot on Facebook, where after a couple breaks up, they take off one of the guys. Well, the guy who's missing on the end there is DeLong. So the Facebook threesome becomes a duo. But I do think it's very telling about the factions that are involved, because another piece of this, of course, is Avi Loeb, who's the scientist from Israel, who's over here at Harvard, maybe just a few blocks away with his astrolab. And this guy put together the Galileo project. And if you might remember, sometime around 2017, 2018, we had this big thing moving through our solar system called Oumuamua. And this guy says, oh, that's not just a big asteroid. That thing is an AI spaceship. And we need to ramp up our own AI in order to meet and greet with these guys. So let's put together a group and a team to do this. And suddenly this Harvard professor was authorized to go out and tell all these stories about Oumuamua. So what happens is this whole piece turns into the Galileo project. And the first thing that they do is they invite in who? Cold Warriors, Lou, and Chris Mellon. Doesn't make any sense. Why would you need military people on a scientific body? Now, there were a lot of interesting rumors there that Mellon had used influence to do this. And I haven't been able to get anything solid, but it looks like it was just something that Avi Loeb kind of decided, I'm going to have these military people on there. Well, now there's more CIA people on the Galileo project. And of course, in the case of Avi, he comes out of Talpiot, which is the CIA version in Israel. So you're just surrounded by a kind of intel world when you're dealing with this stuff, which is the wrong way to approach this, because anything that's important to humanity can't be in the hands of people who, for example, like to assassinate leaders or overthrow countries or mislead the public. That seems like the last place that you'd want to go for any kind of truth. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going deep here in episode X, series 117. This is UFO Neocons, and we're getting to meet some of them early on. We're going to be taking your questions in the second half of the program. It's a great crowd, I could say already tonight, and we will be getting to those questions. What do you got out there?
A cult fan says that we should use celebrity shill odd couple names like Benifer, right? Like Lou and Melon would be Melizondo.
That's pretty.
Which I think is pretty cute.
Melizondo, I like it. But aren't those like soap opera names? Benifer, I like.
Well,
that.
It's Ben and Jennifer, right? They're celebrity couples, right?
Ah, yes. Okay. What else you got?
Well, if you want to go straight into it, Maggie Smith wants to know: is there a particular alien group we think is aligned with the CIA?
Ooh. Oh, that's a really good question. It's interesting that we're in this period of time where we need to seriously ask, are the intelligence agencies that we have in the United States working with an off-world group? I think that we've channeled through enough information, whether it's stories about Area 51, stories about, Dulce complex and all these different things. I think that we'll have to look at enough stories along that line to say it's certainly a possibility. The story about, for example, Eisenhower meeting aliens in the 50s. What's interesting, as I've said before, is that when I've talked to guys like Stanton, the late Stanton Friedman, who's not with us anymore, is one of the best on the UFO side. He told me there was a lot of substance to the Eisenhower story in terms of the arrangement and the witness stories. So it wasn't one of these fly-by-night, did that happen? Are there Nazi bases in Antarctica stories? There's a lot of evidence for Nazis being involved in Antarctica, and also lots of stories about saucers being there. So there are these things, and we know that when stories just hang out there long enough, that there's some substance to them. And in particular, the story about Eisenhower meeting aliens. So based on those stories, it seems like there's two groups that are operating out there. One of the groups are the Pleiadians, who look very human and come from a very kind of philosophical high-tech spectrum. And they look human, but they look kind of angelic. And that's the general disposition of the Pleiadians, and that they've offered to help us in a kind of non-warlike fashion. And then there are the scientific grays, who are kind of like artificial intelligence style beings who want to assist us in return for assistance for them in getting human DNA to help rebuild their own worker force, as it were. So that's the substance, really. And I think there's a lot to support either of those positions. So I feel very confident about that. Over and over again, you hear about negative Draco reptilians and stuff. I think all that stuff, there are stories that get very deep, but this whole thing about Draco this and Draco that seems to be just a fad. I don't think that there's any substance to it. Are there negative ETs? Whenever you get into that field, you're going to have to say that there are. And I think that, it's interesting to see how the government handles the whole issue around the style of the aliens, because they have to go into this threat thing, but they've done enough research that tells them if you mention actual aliens, you're going to have a problem. So they just have to refer to technology and a threat. They can't refer to who's behind the technology. And you see that in these ridiculously parsed press releases and conversations that they have. And Rubio is the master of it. Just saying, oh, there's something intelligent operating in our skies. It doesn't mean anything. You mean that you think that there's aliens piloting UFOs in our skies? It's a totally different question. So, and Lou does that tap dance as well. Right. So this is how, go ahead.
Well, we don't know about the Dracos. We just, I think it's we have to be really honest with ourselves.
It's a fantasy at this point. Yeah.
It is a theory. We just don't know. Right. And human beings we're very uncomfortable sitting with not knowing, you know. And we can have a pet theory and say, I believe this, but ultimately we don't know, right? So we have to leave ourselves open, especially since there is so much deception going on here.
True. There's no question about it. And there's enough anecdotal evidence about the Greys from former military people, from actual people who are abductees, John Mack's group. You know, it's on the record. The Greys are a part of the UFO experience. The Pleiadians also, I think there's enough anecdotal evidence to support them. So in terms of those two groups, we understand that something's going on. And I've seen, you know, the subject go deeper as well. So I'm absolutely 100% convinced that people have had alien encounters, and that some of the things that we see flying around are alien by design. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're nuts and bolts aliens from another planet with metal ships, but certainly something that's a non-human technology. And I've brought up the theory before that Mactoni's rolled out before his untimely death at 33, that, you know, his version of the aliens were these crypto-humanoids. And, you know, he felt that they were just a little bit advanced from us, but that they lived here side by side with us, and predominantly underground. So his theory was quite interesting. And it was a very small little book, and he died shortly afterwards, so we didn't get much more on that. But I think it's a wide open subject, and it's part of that wide open avenue and vista of the whole thing.
We could just drop the entire lecture and all the printouts and everything and just talk. What about mantids, right?
Exactly. Well, just you wait.
Okay.
Because it all is somehow right in the heart there. And we're going to be taking questions in the second half anyway. All right. More strange bedfellows. Senator Marco Rubio's cozy relationship with Democrat Senator Bill Nelson could sway Nelson's re-election bid. So Nelson goes on to be the head of NASA. But here we see Rubio again in that role of kissing up to a Democrat on the aerospace side. Now, the fact that he's going to take a lead role on the UFO front in 2021 is interesting, because that all happened in 2018. Senator Marco Rubio calls on U.S. to take UFO reports seriously. How else would you take them? Well, let me tell you, the U.S. government and the military takes them very, very seriously. So seriously that they won't tell you anything about them. That is, you, Mr. Public person. And then so Rubio is saying, oh, we need to take them seriously. That darn Pentagon, this is one of those things. The Pentagon won't take UFOs seriously. No, they take them very seriously. They studied so much on them, and they have 70, 80 years of knowledge that we don't have. So this is the great imbalance in society. The editorial board, Gillibrand's UFO push earns rapid response on the Hill. That's from the Buffalo Times. Rapid response. I want you to key in on some of the language. You know, remember warp speed? You know, we're going to get out of this by using warp speed. Rapid response, warp speed, all these things that are too fast so you can't question anything. It's an emergency. We need warp speed. It's an emergency. We need rapid response. Anything that gets you past thinking, it's so fast, it's such an emergency, I don't have time to think. Here, take my constitutional rights away. Take my Constitution, please. So what does it say about the U.S. Congress that it's easier to pass a bill on UFOs than curbing sexual assault in the military? New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand was spitting mad this month after Congress watered down her changes aimed at prosecuting sexual assault in the military. This is an interesting thing that she puts herself forward on, which is a very worthy subject. The only problem is her biggest contributors, you know, the people who kind of launched her career and that she does all these photo op with, are the Clintons. So it's a kind of a schizophrenic position for Gillibrand. But anyway, compare that with the smoother path for her proposal to establish a new federal office to study and report on unidentified aerial phenomena. Just say UFO, please. her amendment, co-sponsored by Senator Marco Rubio. So it's Rubio and Gillibrand put the amendment in the National Defense Authorization Act. Remember, that controls $800 billion in the entire defense industry. That's it, $800 billion. That's huge. And that's what's on the record. So close to $1 trillion for a country that's not at war. It's quite remarkable. But they would not let it pass, Rubio and Gillibrand. They held the whole thing on because they wanted to make sure that the UFO UAP ASRO office was in there, and that it had Averell Haines, who's the National Intelligence Director of National Intelligence, as the person that needs to be reported to. And Haines, we've gotten into a few times here. She's known as the Drone Queen to John Brennan's Drone King in the Obama administration. U.S. Navy and Air Force pilots have long filed reports about spotting things in the sky they can't complain. They can't explain. Yeah, tell me about it. There's only been about 5 million TV shows, documentaries, witness reports. So yeah, thanks for filling us in on that one. All right. But there's some unusual waves when we get around Gillibrand that might make her a key person for the UFO file. Right now, she's front and center, the leading figure because of the Gillibrand Amendment. Which, remember, the amendment, unless it was taken on, blocked a bill that's $800 billion for the United States military. And both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican, signed on to that thing for the $800 billion for all the goodies that their districts get. So there was no bipartisan rancor. They were united. There was no problems. There was no woke separation of issues or anything. That just give us that $800 billion and we'll cooperate. Don't worry, sir. No problem. All right. Let's get into some weirdness with Gillibrand. Somebody mentioned that her dad was in a cult. Yeah. So her dad was in the NXIVM cult, but so was her mom. So we get into a strange place there where we know the NXIVM cult went down the road of recruiting people from like Smallville. They had these actresses involved, and it was a sex cult, and there was human trafficking involved. There was abuse involved. And Keith Raniere, who ran it, is also an interesting piece of work as a Mormon and a real psycho. But, you know, I'll go into him in more depth at a better period. But for now, let's just remember this kind of Mormon connection going on there. Democratic presidential candidate Senator Kirsten Gillibrand speaks at an event in Washington on Monday. Court papers show Gillibrand's father worked for NXIVM sex cult. But here's an interesting, there's a couple of these. Secret of Upstate Group had Gillibrand's dad on the payroll. Now, what happened was they were paying him pretty good money, but at a certain point, they sued him, and he got into real big problems with them. He wasn't doing things the way that they wanted him to. And then as a result, there's a kind of major member of the cult, is Claire Bronfman. And Bronfman is part of the Seagram's fortune out of Canada. And the Bronfman family has those deep ties all the way back to Lewis Mortimer Bloomfield and the Permindex organization. And so this gets us into, and Mortimer was president of Heineken. And so it gets us into these kind of heavy duty mafia enclaves coming out of places like Montreal. But in any case, big money involved. But here's a twist. Father, presidential candidate, because she was a presidential candidate in 2020, Gillibrand once worked for Trump. That's another story on that front. So the father gets around, and that was all about tribal casino action, and Trump had him on the payroll for a couple of years. So this guy, NXIVM cult, this guy also part of Trump's legal representation, Trump hotels and casino resorts. So you can see very colorful backgrounds going on in relation to Gillibrand. Her dad also was very, very big in that Albany Senator D'Amato machine that controlled New York. So very deep aspects through her family on the political side. And then this connection with NXIVM, which was a really hardcore sex cult with all those ties to Hollywood. Let's go a little bit further. Then we're looking at her father-in-law. Well, the father-in-law, she's married to Jonathan Gillibrand, and he is a British venture capitalist who really holds his cards close so that people don't know exactly what he's investing in. And boy, would I like that list. So this guy, however, was part of British Aerospace. And, British Aerospace, just to give you an example, British Aerospace Systems secures $90 million Navy contract. Engineering and integrations systems firm British Aerospace Systems has secured a 5-year, $90 million contract to modernize and maintain systems within vehicles. Okay, so the aerospace links through Gillibrand are just remarkable, now directly through her family. So are there payoffs involved in that through those connections? Well, this is just an odd story, but I think these are good questions to ask. And again, what I want to remark on in relation to some of these figures is that, investigative journalism is very often adversarial journalism. It's not personal, but by the very nature of it, if you're investigating a corporate head or someone who's part of an oil company who's polluting rivers and stuff, it's going to be adversarial. There is no way around it because you're trying to get to the truth, and you try to do it in a civil fashion. But so there's nothing particularly about Senator Gillibrand personally that I have any issue with at all. But I think bringing these things out, since she's the main point person now for the UAP, UFO Threat Op, is crucial because her background speaks to the kind of actions that she'll take. And especially the fact that they're gearing her up as a presidential candidate in 2024, which I'm going to get to. Now, it's interesting because right now they're touting this potential of Trump running against Hillary. So they're doing the Florida, I kid you not. Hey, the Wall Street Journal touted that. Isn't that odd?
Trial balloon.
A trial balloon, exactly. But what's interesting about it for me is that Hillary is New York and Trump's Florida. Well, they might have the Florida-New York part down, but the two figures involved may end up being Rubio and Gillibrand, and this could be president disclosure that we're looking at here. And again, of course, that disclosure is in quotes, and it's CIA disclosure in parentheses. So keep that in mind.
So, and do you think a potential unity ticket between them?
It's possible. It's possible. It would be a kind of a magic stroke. And we know it was floated during the last election. It's worth keeping in mind. Let's get a look at somebody who's very hard to photograph, which is Sidney Gillibrand. And even this picture is a little fuzzy, but Sidney Gillibrand, who is now with British Aerospace for 45 years. That means you build the company and you retire with the company. But he became the chairman of something called Cheshire Engineering. And that construction giant is called AMEC. And he's the chairman. And what did they get to do? They got to be the major piece of cleaning up the 9/11 destruction. So there he is. And one of the few public photos that you can get of the man, Sidney Gillibrand. That is the father-in-law of Kirsten Gillibrand, and we're going to see why he plays such a major role here. So Gillibrand's father-in-law gives them, her and her husband, $457,000 gift from in-laws. And it's not subject to taxation since it's just a gift. U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and her husband received a $457,000 cash gift from her British in-laws last year, according to Gillibrand's tax return. The gift, first reported by Newsday, was larger than her adjusted gross income. The money was not subject to federal income tax and is not subject to federal limits on donations to candidates. It's something that I think represents a move there because, of course, they can do all this kind of money through stock exchanges and everything else. They don't have to do it publicly. But I think the fact that this thing came out is very crucial because it shows that that family has that background in aerospace, and that the things that she's doing in relation to aerospace, which we're going to get to shortly here, this is what has made her such a desirable person in relation to the UFO file. Just a quick thing here on Claire Bronfman. Bronfman is the one who gave serious amounts of money to the campaigns that Gillibrand ran. And the thing about those campaigns that's interesting to me is this is long after her dad had stopped representing the NXIVM cult, but not long after Bronfman was a big, deep figure inside the Bronfman cult. As a matter of fact, they used to call her setup name was Prefect.
Wow.
Inside the cult. And there she is. She became the big open door to the Bronfman bank accounts for Rainier to drain, pretend he was doing these great stock deals and all the rest of it, and build up this imaginary kind of, figure of himself as this Superman, so that these very impressionable women were getting involved and would become slaves in that sex cult. This is a shot of Gillibrand with Clinton, which I think is significant because, a big part of her brand is that she wants to get at this sexual assault in the military thing, which is a good cause, but she has a problem there with the Me Too type thing because you can't be somebody who Clinton sponsors and really go very far on that front. I do want to read this kind of quick piece and tie it into some research that I've done here on this program before relating to an organization called Defense Industrial Security Command that was revealed in a 60s version of the WikiLeaks, which is called the Torbit document. And you can think of it as basically the WikiLeaks of 1970. But the story is New York heiress charged with supporting sex trafficking operation. New York liquor heiress was arrested, this is from 2018, on Tuesday as part of an ongoing investigation into a group accused of coercing women into sex. Claire Bronfman, 39, is an heiress to the Seagram's liquor fortune. She's also an executive board member of NXIVM. Despite billing itself as a community guided by humanitarian principles, they had the Dalai Lama speak. They gave him like $500,000 to speak. After he found out about this, a lot of people said, hey, you're going to give the money back? Dalai Lama never gave the money back, which I find strange. The organization had a secret group that recruited and enslaved female followers under the pretense of mentorship. These women were allegedly ordered to sleep with the organization's founder, Keith Rainier, branded with a cauterizing pen, and punished with paddles and put in cages. Nice guy. Bronfman used her riches to bankroll the organization, spending millions on private air travel for Rainier and lawyers who sued critics, authorities said. There's a little ring of Scientology in there. The details of these alleged crimes became more and more grim as we continue to dig deeper into the conduct of this organization and its intended mission. FBI Assistant Director in Charge, William Sweeney, said, in the face of mounting accusations from ex-followers and critics, Bronfman remained loyal to Rainier. I know him to be a man dedicated to the betterment of the lives of others, Bronfman said. Most importantly to me, he is a dear friend. Yes, it's so nice of him to put all those people in cages. Way to go. She wrote in her website. So Rainier was eventually sentenced to 71 years in prison, and Bronfman also was sent up for a decade. So these are really deep operators, and they were able to contain the story, even though it was spilling out into Hollywood and spilling out into political figures. But one of those areas that it spilled out into was Gillibrand's background, because it was not only her dad that was involved with it, but he got his wife involved. So, blackmail is a really big deal for the CIA. They kind of work on blackmail. And when you're dealing with the UFO file, the figures around it who are guiding it, if they're easy to blackmail, you're never going to get any truth out of anything. So, we have stories about Rubio, and, he has this gay past, and it's not something that he wanted made public. And I don't even think anyone would have a problem with his past at all in this era. But nonetheless, that whole piece, and the whole bathhouse stories about Rubio, all those pieces remain out there. And so again, you have this kind of blackmailable piece involved on both the Gillibrand side and the Rubio side that could easily be investigated. And it would be a normal thing to investigate them, not saying guilty or innocent or whatever, just getting that information out. Because if they are blackmailable, then they're put into those positions by the CIA in order for the fact that, if they become the point people, as they are right now for the UFO file, the CIA can call the shots on them by just saying, hey, you know what, if you don't play ball, we'll show those videos we have of you in the orgies with the cult, So those are the types of games that J. Edgar Hoover passed down to us. Isn't that nice? And so that, it is what it is. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is the X Series 117, and we're going deep here on UFO Neocons. And that means that X Protect goes public. Are we looking at president disclosure? We're going to be taking your questions in the second half of the program, which is coming up here. I have some more things to get to in relation to these figures, but how are we doing out there?
Well, I have someone in the ideas room who is insistent on knowing why these subjects are important to you, what your personal experience is around all of this. And I guess that would be whether you've had any kind of ET experiences and why you're passionate about it.
Oh, well, that's a big question. I can answer it this way, which is I've always kind of been a dark journalist. So the fact that I'm able to do it now full time is just a great relief to me, because I'd be studying the stuff anyway. And but no, it's always been interesting to me. And I'll tell you this also, which is, one of the books I remember reading when I was about 7 years old was The Eighth Tower by John Keel. So something, very early on going on there in relation to these subjects. And so I have a great, deep, abiding interest in it. What I found out, and what fascinates me, is the level to which it gets distorted in the popular media. And so if you and I, the folks here in the ideas room, can get something different going, even with a conversation like we're having tonight, this is exactly the conversations I think that they try to censor on the internet, and why they don't want people to get together. Because if we get together around these subjects, we'll know so much in relation to something as hidden as the UFO file, for example, that, trying to deceive us around it, they'll have a more difficult time in relation to it. Right now, I think one of the central things in culture is understanding the UFO file properly. We're in the middle of a huge pharma takeover, global dictatorship as well, but it seems like this is the issue that they're going to use as the major op going forward. It's going to be the follow-on op. So our timing couldn't be more pivotal, I would say, in relation to this. So the issue itself is very important. And what I see in the popular media and in the liberal media are very young reporters who don't know anything about the UFO file at all, or reporters who are cynical. But the ones who don't know anything about it, they write all this stuff about it. And it's almost like, they've been watching a Netflix series or something and think that they know anything about this. And so they're very easy to manipulate, because, the CIA tends to be behind a lot of the entertainment you see on Netflix as well. So we really need... unfortunately, the CIA did a very clever thing, but it's unfortunate for the culture, which is the really good researchers around the UFO file. And this is something that Stanton Friedman used to tell me, that there weren't any good researchers on the UFO side. And the reason that there weren't any good researchers, and I mean, that was kind of a blanket statement. I'm sure there were exceptions, of course, but he was saying that weren't of his generation. So the older people, they were good, but there was nobody good coming up. And the reason for that, he said, was that the CIA and the media had starved out the field, because if people couldn't get anywhere, if it wasn't respected the way it was, by the time the CIA moved into it, the thing was pretty much collapsible. It was already sucked out from the inside because no one could make a real legitimate career out of its study. How do you get a UFO expert anyway? Do you have UFO college where you go to UFO college and you study for 4 years and you leave with a UFO degree? You see, it doesn't work that way. They've left it in the lurch on purpose. So that gap, we need to, through very balanced study, using the really good research that's gone before us, and eliminating the CIA circus aspects, along with the marketeering and the entertainment, and really get to the core of what the subject is that we're talking about. Because a lot of those people around the UFO file who would generally be there to kind of say, oh, these people coming into this thing, it's an op, collapsed. And they rolled out the red carpet for the CIA on this. So, and I was shocked to see that. And it was a great disappointment to me over the last 4 years to witness this. But that's, it is what it is in that sense. So here we are. But very interesting question indeed. Okay, now what is the role of the UFO neocons in all this? What is it that they get by promoting the UFO file? Well, Gillibrand, we spent some time there. Let's go back in time a little bit to find out about something called Defense Industrial Security Command. This was a group that was noted by William Torbit, who came out with an incredible data dump in 1970 called the Torbit document. That was in part leaked to him, and in part came from his own experience working as one of the LBJ lawyers. So he was, he'd get a lot of information working in that Texas circuit as an LBJ lawyer. And Torbit, of course, is a pseudonym. And when Torbit first released this, of course, he feared for his life. But it was so far out there that, the whole tie-in of NASA to the Kennedy assassinations, for example, and the presence of paperclip Nazis in NASA were pretty far out for 1970. It took a while for people to get on board with it. As a matter of fact, one of the books I want to recommend that really got to this is Project Paperclip by Clarence Lasby. This book, in fact, took the subject matter and brought it forward in detail. I want to think of the year on this book. Okay, so it came out originally in 1971. So right there on the cusp with the Torbit document, Clarence Lasby goes into it and finds out the German scientists in the Cold War and how we got the German scientists over here, and they created our space program because they were so advanced on the German side with it. Now, the subject's been studied, but the piece that needs to be remembered is that Kennedy himself, by the time he gets into office, he's shocked by how much of the old command protocol of the Nazis is still in place. For example, the setup for von Braun in the rocket program over at NASA, he has the same people in the same positions that they had in Nazi Germany. Now, it gives us a great advantage over the Russians, but he becomes concerned at a certain point when he said that the space program is on 2 tracks. And these are documents that came out around 2015. And he sends Robert McNamara, his defense secretary, over to NASA, and he says, look, you have Blue Gemini, you have this other program, you need to streamline these things. Otherwise, we have a public program and something else. The something else that's referenced there is the secret space program. It had its roots as early as that. So Kennedy is coming back in this period, and when he's saying to the CIA, look, I've decided that instead of a space race, we're going to get together with the Russians and go to the moon together. The aspect of the CIA and the deep state that's tied in with this paperclip Nazi aspect that's in NASA, they're working on alternative technology based on the UFO file. They don't want to share that with the Russians or with the rest of humanity at all. And so in their mind, Kennedy becomes a national security threat. And, the things that happen moving forward because Kennedy's in opposition to the CIA and this thing. Now, the thing is the same piece that we see when we hear all about these records that are available that are being blocked from the CIA about the Kennedy assassination 60 years later. Why would anybody do that? What would be the reason? Obviously, you don't live in a free society if they're still able to block those records. Well, One of the things I've pointed out is that Judge Napolitano, who's a real kind of liberty type guy and libertarian judge, and you see him on all these different types of news programs over the years. He was close friends with Trump and then had a big falling out with him. But before that falling out, he was friends with him when he got into office and around the time that the Kennedy records were supposed to be released, which was October 26, 2017. And that was because in 1992, the Oliver Stone movie caused such a furor. People demanded to see the records. And Congress said, okay, we'll make it a law. 25 years, they have to come out no matter what. Nobody can stop it. It's going to come out. So they were originally slated to come out in 2039, which these politicians were like, all right, by 2039, here we are in 1963, like nobody's going to care. But instead, they were slated to come out by law October 26, 2017. And what ended up happening was instead what we got were the big block by the CIA at the last minute. So Napolitano was in a conversation with President Trump, and he said, and he recently disclosed this. This was not on the record till about a month ago when he was talking with Gerald Celente, of all people. And he said to him, I was talking to Trump, and I said, we really, can't wait to have those records out. And he promised me that he would release them. Then when the day came, I called him up and said, why aren't you releasing them? And Trump said, I can't release them. You wouldn't believe what's in there. And then Napolitano said, look, you can't treat the public like children. You need to release those records. What are you talking about? Put it out. We can handle it. And that Trump said, Anthony, if you knew what was in those records, or Andrew, if you knew what was in those records, you wouldn't release them either. So whatever it is that is actually in those records, and there's always been this thing about, oh, well, they altered those records a long time ago, so it's no big deal. There's not going to be anything. Apparently, there is a bombshell in those records after all. And that would explain the years and years of hiding it around the Kennedy assassination. Now, it is possible. I've gone through the records on this and looked at Bobby Kennedy's actions as he was still Attorney General dealing with the CIA after the assassination. And it is possible that he installed a mechanism in those records that would make it impossible for them to be expunged without there being some record of it. So they must have just left it in there and said, we'll just block it forever. That's what I think is going on. And in my opinion, ultimately, the records, certainly the records involving this group, Defense Industrial Security Command, which would reveal a lot about the actual political structure at the time, and the CIA's connection with NASA and the aerospace companies in relation to the assassination. That's the piece that Garrison stumbled into. And guess what? Those records were the other record set that's blocked, which is the Garrison records from the late 60s, where the CIA penetrated his trials against these figures that were involved with aerospace, because everywhere he went in the Kennedy assassination, he found these aerospace connections, including with Oswald, who said before he got caught up in the Texas School Book Depository, the summer before, when he left Riley Coffee Company in New Orleans, he said, I'm going to work at NASA. So Garrison goes to the Riley Coffee Company. He said, well, I want to talk to all of his coworkers. Oh, they all joined NASA. So the Riley Coffee Company is a weird aerospace front operating as a company. And the CIA has a number of companies like that that serve a different function. One of the other weird things, apparently, that Riley was doing was they were able to send things to Cuba. And apparently one of the things they were doing was sending these barrels over that were supposed to be loaded with coffee, and they were loaded with munitions instead. So we have a whole piece there that's not included in general regular history in relation to the UFO file. It has to be understood that it's in relation to this thing, and it's this aerospace activity that is what Garrison, after all of his own work, the New Orleans DA investigating the Kennedy assassination, he said, oh, actually, the assassination is embedded inside the aerospace wing of the military-industrial complex. That was his conclusion. And that's after really going through it in the period. It's not a cold case like it is now. So when we look at it this way, we can see that there's a lot of things in relation to the UFO file, including the fact that we had Douglas Caddy, the Watergate lawyer in this program, come out and say, which is the only place that it was revealed at the time, was that his friend E. Howard Hunt, the CIA super spy, had told him the Kennedy assassination. He told him this in private, not for public dissemination, so it wasn't like misinformation, that the Kennedy had been assassinated due to the fact that he was going to reveal the UFO file and he wanted to share it with the Russians. And he thought also, if we share high-risk cases with them, then, we won't have any incidents over our nuclear bases. If a UFO goes over there, people won't think, hey, it's the Americans attacking us, because we'll both have the same info. So there's a record of that memo that he gave to the CIA in relation to it. That's on record. Caddy, the Watergate lawyer's confession. I guess testimony is a better word.
Mm-hmm.
It's Hunt's confession. That's on record. So there's a piece of history there. And that explains, when you see these stories that go round and round, why are those files still blocked? Look, there it is. It's on the record. All those media companies have to do is look at that thread that I just laid out and the story's over. They're hiding the aerospace connection to the assassination. That's what makes sense. So now we're going to jump back from the 60s to 2022 again. And now we're looking at Rubio and we're looking at Gillibrand. So Gillibrand runs for office in 2022. She has all these aerospace connections through her husband, and the British aerospace connections. And she has her own connections to the NXIVM cult through her dad and her father's wife. Okay. Now, Marco Rubio. Why select Rubio? Rubio's a hawk and anti-Castro Cuban, and he's from, he tells the story of his parents fleeing Castro's Cuba, but apparently that story is not true. Big surprise. And then Lou has a story that's very similar like that too. Like, his father was a Bay of Pigs cold warrior. So there's always this thread about Cuba in there. And notice the hot zone comes up over and over again. Remember, the Space Coast is right there in the heart of the hot zone. All right. Rubio is neocon. Okay. Senator Marco Rubio says war with Iran is in the hands of Ayatollah Khomeini. It's all on them. He came out as the hardcore guy during the 2016 election, saying that we need to bomb Iran and that, if they don't want to get bombed, they better come to the table and that kind of thing. So he was a super hawk, and all of his foreign policy positions were pure neocon. You might as well have been Dick Cheney. Rubio was pretty young in that coming in too. Like he was maybe like 39-year-old senator. Now it's Marco Rubio claims U.S. needs to tackle stigma and take UFOs seriously. We need to bomb them. It's not Iranians anymore. We need that neocon mindset around the UFO file, because if we can get the neocon mindset around the UFO file, it's easy to allocate the emergency powers. It's easy to allocate all this military money for a UFO division to deal with the threat, etc. But it also is a springboard to the presidency. And this is why president disclosure is so important. Now we see that the odd couple, if you cue the odd couple theme, and thinking about Gillibrand and Rubio together, there's something very strange about that, because here's a guy who's proven his neocon, kind of his real leanings in that department. And then we have this liberal Democrat in New York working together with him on this UAP addition to the National Defense Authorization Act. All right, now I have to say this in relation to the National Defense Authorization Act, is that the NDAA gives the COG piece continuity of government piece presidential sanction every time it's signed. Everyone signs it. Obama signed it, Trump signed it, Bush signed it. That's just the way it is. There's no separation at that level. They want the ability to exercise the emergency powers. The continuity of government peace is now tied up with the UFO file, because the person who's in charge of it now, Admiral Van Herk, he is from the 509th group, which has a direct relationship to the Roswell bombing group. And the interesting thing, when you go back over the Roswell story, what you've got is Jesse Marcel saying, look, I was in charge of the atomic bomb squad, and he was the most trusted intelligence agent on the planet. What he discovered, he was called to a ranch, and he saw basically all this debris from a spaceship that had never been anything that he had ever seen as part of the Air Force intelligence. So fundamentally, when you're looking at the 509th, and now there's somebody from that 509th, the direct lineage from the Roswell incident to COG, just at the time that they're putting forward the UFO threat op, you have to add those things together. But the bottom line is, in the middle of that amendment, as I was reading it, as they were talking about ASRO and this other one, which I call Anna, as an annoying name Anomaly, because the name of it is just ridiculous. I have it there in the description. I can actually read it because I don't like to leave these things out. Here we go. ASRO is Anomaly Surveillance and Resolution Office. Okay, that's the one that Avril Haines is in charge of. AOIMSG, this is the other one, Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group. This is very important because in the language there, they include the combatant commanders. The combatant commanders are the COG regional governors that would take over in the event of a national emergency. And remember, I've gone into the history of COG before, but just in a nutshell, originally created in order to survive a nuclear attack. So it's a vast underground complex that's, they're able to function with food, with survival, with electronics, to be able to launch missiles and all the rest of it. It's a gigantic underground world. And it's a gigantic underground world economy that we don't know anything about, because you're not allowed to speak about it there's no oversight. This is the nature of the problem with COG, because it's so secret. The idea is, the secrecy came out of the fact of the Soviets can never discover that we're, creating this underground base, because if they knew what it was all about, then they could easily dismantle us if it came down to a first strike setup. So it has that kind of deep secrecy. Now, what happened with continuity of government operations is right around the time of the moon landings and the entire Apollo program, the rules of continuity of government got switched and turned to space, so that up in space, the same types of continuity of government secrecy rules could apply. That's when the missions to the moon stopped, and anything else that would happen, we wouldn't learn about, because they were able to shut off all of that development using the COG rules of, hey, it's an emergency, and under that emergency setup of rules, I don't have to disclose any of that to Congress or the president. So one of the things that Professor Scott found out in relation to the continuity of government group is that people who were associated with COG and something called the Doomsday Network, which is literally their communications networks, that's what it was called, all those people would show up in the middle of these deep events that would change history. They were all connected with it somehow, whether it was through the Watergate program or 9/11 or the Kennedy assassination. All the people that would show up would be personnel from continuity of government. So there's a definite overhang from the emergency piece, which gives them complete control. And when they came out with COVID in that original period, when Pence was there with Trump, and they were like, if both of them get COVID, then we'll be able to signal COG, and they'll be the ones who will take over. And then suddenly Nancy Pelosi and Newsweek were talking about, hey, COG, continuity of government gave me my little update today. And this thing suddenly was out there in the public eye. So the emergency piece, an emergency takeover, and NORTHCOM taking over the United States all comes out of the emergency legislation that was put there and is active under the September 11th emergency. So the people who've taken a deep look at that, like Professor Scott, have all said, we need to have a dedicated group inside of Congress to remove the 9/11 emergency powers, because you're getting all these other emergency powers as a result of that 9/11 piece. And it brings that COG group to prominence, because now they have excuses anywhere to start applying those COG type of emergency powers. During the COVID thing, you saw governors come out and say, aha, I could pronounce martial law. Well, no, in a constitutional America, you can't, in fact, not lawfully. So, but he's saying, but I have emergency powers. I can do anything I want with emergency powers. I can hold your family in a camp because it's an emergency. And this is the kind of weird stuff that we were getting from Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer and others. This is the level that they're on. They're not only are they power mad, but they understand that they have this sick, endorsement from behind the scenes, from the crowd that brought you the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum. Those people love the idea of upsetting the apple cart because they want to take away the whole idea of people even owning property, etc. So if an emergency can get us there, so much the better. And the thing is, the COVID emergency, well, that's got them pretty far, but it can't bring them over the finish line. The UFO threat can do it.
Okay, so this is a perfect moment to ask this question. Fred D. So Nixon told Merritt there would be a catastrophic event for humanity in 2020. It happened. How is COVID connected to the alien presence?
That is an interesting prediction. And Merritt worked for the Houston Plan. So think of the Houston Plan as like the White House CIA. And the Houston Plan is so secret, it's part of the stealth archives that we have in this country, because the Houston Plan is so secret that even when it came up during the Church Committee, where they were really inclined to open things up, the Church Committee was like, we can't open that one up. And they didn't get the ability to do it because it was all put under by Judge Sirica in Watergate. It was put under a complete legal box. So they boxed it in, and the ability to get any information about the Houston Plan is just, it's not possible. But Merritt was one of the employees of the Houston Plan. And so the idea, going back there and looking at Merritt and his final confession on this program before he passed away, basically was this piece about 2020 was interesting. And what I deduced from it after listening to Caddy and Merritt was that it was Gene Dixon who had such great access to the Nixon White House. That's where they got this prediction for 2020, and it turned out to be very accurate. The relationship of the COVID emergency to the UFO emergency, I think they both utilize the same kind of, we're going to move humanity in a direction, we're going to mold them in a direction, and we're going to supersede things like the sovereignty of nations and constitutions to do that. So that's why the Enterprise is so dangerous in that sense. We've had things in the world before, we've looked at it and said, like, it's too bad we have a psycho running North Korea, for example, and that they have some nuclear weapons, but what can you do? This thing is global. They want a global dictatorship. They have the money and the power, and this is what they've been trying to push. And they're trying to, through this transhumanism belief system that they have, which comes from a very deep occult set of beliefs, that they're trying to reshape humanity in that image. They're trying to separate humanity from their own spirituality in that sense. So they're trying to create a tiered society with them as overlords. So, we do enough of that with central banking anyway. And I think in general, people, the average public has always allowed for things. We've always allowed for psychos in our midst. We've always allowed for, the Rockefellers and things like that. But at the point where they're coming in and they want people's children and they want to control you and they want to take away your sovereignty, that's the point where you've gone past the red line in the sand. And so somebody got into the ear of the World Economic Forum types and said, hit them with shock and awe. They won't know what hit them and all the rest of it. And that's the advice that they took. I think what we're looking at is the breakdown of that advice. They got pretty far doing it, but an awful lot of their operation, because of the speed at which it was developed, is falling apart, so that people like Fauci, for example, are completely disintegrating, or Biden is disintegrating before our eyes, a step for Biden. So this is the nature of the environment that we find ourselves in. 2022 promises to be a huge year, and the UFO file is right in the center of it. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is UFO Neocons now, X-117. We're going to be getting into your questions here very shortly. Already out of the ideas room, fantastic questions. So we'll take about 10 more minutes on this and then get into your questions. How you doing out there?
Doing great. Chill has a question. Was early NASA just a money laundering extension of the CIA?
Well, Eisenhower tried everything that he could to keep it out of the military side. So technically, it was not a military outfit. It was a scientific study outfit for space. And Kennedy was dedicated to peace in space, set up treaties around the idea, gave speeches at the UN. We must never have war in space because, it's just too horrible to even think about. Then by the time you get to this era, everybody's talking about, hey, China has, space weapons, so we're going to have all these weapons in space. And they've been building up for this. And it's like, oh, that's just normal. We're going to have space weapons. No, it's not normal. In fact, we've signed on to treaties that would completely prevent anything like that from ever happening. So fundamentally, we're in a strange situation with this. Space Force, which is something, was Trump's huge gamble. And it is a very interesting gamble. And it's one that the Biden administration is still afraid of. That idea was, if we have an actual armed services unit that's part of space, they'll be in charge of space. Therefore, they can command all of the records around the UFO file. This was Trump's attempt to say, I'm the president, give me back all the things that Eisenhower gave away that Kennedy tried to get back. And unfortunately, though, the person who was working around him at the time, the two people, Gina Haspel and Mike Pompeo, former CIA director and then his current CIA director, they both got in his ear and said, you have to make it that we're number one military power in space. And so the whole idea of not having war in space went out the window with that. So it's a mixed bag with the Space Force. However, as a gambit to get the UFO file back under presidential control, I think it's a really interesting move. And it sits out there right now with no support from the Biden administration. They're afraid in the first year. They don't know what to do with it because it's honeycombed with Trump people. So it makes it very tricky for them to pull off the CIA UFO off with that there. Here's an interesting segue in that regard. Now, remember our friend Kirsten Gillibrand, the Defense Department may be getting an office to investigate UFOs. So now Gillibrand says that this is really important. We really have to be doing this, this UFO office. And, I'm going to have my friend Avril Haines head it up, the Director of National Intelligence. This is what she had to say in 2018. As Vice President Pence plans for new separate U.S. Space Force as 6 military service by 2020. Here's what she said as a senator. Checklist of priorities before Space Force: reunite families separated at the border, clean drinking water in Flint, equal pay for equal work, reduce the cost of drugs and healthcare. She had no interest in moving forward with a UFO office or Space Force or anything. She had normal senatorial things. So what happened between that Senator Gillibrand and this one? It's all about UFOs and it's the most important thing on the planet. Well, she got a new pal. Who was her new pal? Who did she start showing up with? Again, cue the Odd Couple music. Marco Rubio. It was Rubio and Gillibrand. Suddenly they were doing all kinds of things together. Well, they co-sponsored a bill together. Senator Marco Rubio teams up with New York Democrat to help veterans exposed to toxic burn pits. So there's another good cause. But why is Rubio and Gillibrand, why are those two working on it? There's a whole series of them. And then it culminates in what? Rubio, Gillibrand, Galejo, we referred to earlier, applaud inclusion of unidentified aerial phenomena amendment in National Defense Bill. I'll read from this briefly. U.S. Senators Marco Rubio and Kirsten Gillibrand, along with Congressman Ruben Galejo, special operations crowd control guy from Harvard, who changed his last name and image, applauded the inclusion of their unidentified aerial phenomena amendment in the fiscal year 2022 National Defense Authorization Act. They held it up because if they didn't approve it on the amendment side, then the whole legislation gets held up because they're on the Senate Intelligence Committee. So you're talking about holding $800 billion up. And everybody wants that money. So it's pretty easy if you say, I'm putting this amendment in. If you don't pass the amendment, we can't clear the legislation. Everybody's like, all right, yeah, we'll take it. So UAPs pose a significant challenge to our national security, appearing in sensitive U.S. airspace and around military personnel. The amendment would establish an office that would replace the current Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force and would have access to the Department of Defense intelligence community data related to UAPs. Rubio and Gillibrand were joined by Senators Lindsey Graham and Martin Heinrich and Roy Blunt. So we have Martin Heinrich, a Democrat from New Mexico, Lindsey Graham, of course, Republican, South Carolina, Roy Blunt, Republican from Missouri. Rubio is the vice chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Gillibrand is being positioned with Rubio, and they're both being positioned as president disclosure. They're both on top of the UFO issue. They've both run for president. They're both popular in their parties relatively. Rubio says, it's my hope that the creation of a new joint Defense Department and intelligence community office focused on UAPs will provide the resources, analytics, and attention needed to determine what is loitering around our military training ranges. You think about UFOs loitering. There we go. Our national security efforts rely on aerial supremacy, and these phenomena present a challenge to our dominance over the air. This is Gillibrand now. Staying ahead of UAP sightings is critical to keeping our strategic edge and keeping our nation safe. They've turned Gillibrand into a neocon, liberal Democrat. Well, I guess if her friend was the Hillary bombing, Libya bombing Hillary, then it was pretty easy to do that after all. So now that puts her in a very interesting position because Senator Gillibrand effort to study UFOs likely to become law. In fact, it did. She is now the point person on the UFO file, and the person who sponsored her knowledge and her involvement with the whole thing, Marco Rubio, a Republican. Doesn't make any sense politically. He would have tried to find another Republican to do it, but he found Senator Gillibrand. Quote, Wall Street Journal, U.S. military is about to start taking UFOs seriously, thanks in large part to bipartisan odd couple team, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, New York Democrat, and Senator Marco Rubio, a Florida Republican. New York and Florida, Trump and Hillary, Rubio and Gillibrand. Gillibrand and Rubio announced Thursday passed defense authorization bill for fiscal 2022 will include their amendment to establish a new federal office to study what they call unidentified aerial phenomena. UAPs, namely the mysterious flying objects that Air Force pilots and other military personnel have reported seeing. Yes, you think they have? We've only had, I mean, the Twilight Zone is like, what, 1959 or something?
Mm-hmm.
We pretty much know what these things are, okay? Long the obsession of starry-eyed teens and sci-fi fanatics and dark journalists, unidentified flying objects have drawn new interest in the military and Congress because they think about all the emergency powers, right? In recent years, simply because military pilots keep seeing inexplicable objects. So the fact that they kept seeing them made it happen. Like, I keep seeing this, so we better make legislation 70 years later. In fact, 60 Minutes in May showed a video of a pilot that appears, shot by a pilot, appears to show a UFO moving at high speed several miles away from a military jet. Yeah, I mean, they had that film in 1948 too, so, what's the difference? With that sort of thing happening, Gillibrand and Rubio, a progressive Democrat and conservative Republic, agreed that the federal government must put more effort into studying UFOs. Quote, It's my hope the creation of the new Joint Defense Department Intelligence Community Office focused on UAPs will provide the resources, blah, blah, blah. The Gillibrand-Rubio measure creates an office run jointly by the DoD and the DNI. And Avril Haines, of course, is in charge of the DNI. So what we have, in fact, are a series of neocons in charge of the UFO file. Rubio with his desire to bomb Iran, in fact, and Gillibrand with all of her aerospace connections, which I haven't even got into all of them because there's so many. But one thing I will say that I think is important to put on the record, and that's a shot of Gillibrand with her venture capitalist British husband, whose dad, of course, is in charge of British aerospace. That, oh, and I have a shot of her and Rubio and Pence during the moon mission that they were planning there. Now, remember, the person who sponsored our girl, Gillibrand, to get into Congress and get into the Senate in the first place, she was appointed, first time out, by the way, over Carolyn Kennedy. And it was Hillary Clinton's seat, and Hillary Clinton has been her major sponsor. But interestingly enough, there were a lot of things swirling around Hillary that she was using this term UAP during the presidential election, that she was going to be president disclosure. And here we have Podesta saying on Ancient Aliens in 2018 that Hillary Clinton would have declassified UFO information. That's the tweet from Washington Examiner. So you have to put these pieces together about why these neocons on the right and left want that their fingers on that UFO file. What is it? What is the emergency powers that they can get from it? That entire UFO threat operation promises something. And that's why you see all these politicians who normally would have nothing to do with this subject jumping all over it.
Is it the one world government?
Certainly that's a big piece of it.
Well, you think you can see all the pieces being laid out, you know, the breadcrumb trail that they're laying out towards that. We know that's their end goal. And ultimately, I mean, it may take a few years to get there, you know, but after we have digital currency, et cetera, digital IDs,
that's a huge
how are
piece.
you going to get each country to actually sign on to an actual group like the UN or something like the UN to represent all, like, the global population, right? It seems like maybe that ultimately is it. And it's why it's kind of clumsy right now, because it's actually, they're still working things out.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
And as they said, we're in a live exercise.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're also piggybacking on top of, you know, the problem with this is they're coming in and saying, we don't know what this is. They certainly know what it is. Second of all, they're saying military pilots are reporting it. Yeah, but they have for 80 years. So why would you do something about it now? So none of those excuses make any difference. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going deep, deep, deep here on President Disclosure, UFO Neocons, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Marco Rubio. Of course, Lou was right in the middle of that. And we can't forget Lou, because Lou got voted GQ Hero of the Year. Hey, he also got a book deal. Not bad for lying your face off in public. But when you think about the Lou thing and the whistleblower thing that they came up with, Lou just comes out of the CIA, 25 years of CIA involvement. Of course, there's DIA and Army intelligence, whatever, but it's the CIA that I'm interested in here. And fundamentally, you know, his story is, I ran a tip, which has never been proved out. And also he's had to, you know, bob and weave through the whole thing to say, well, maybe I did see that, but I didn't really. It was classified, but it wasn't classified, and all the rest. And so his latest thing now, they put him lower on the radar scale, and they've been trying to kind of pump up this entertainment thing around DeLong and Jim Semivan. But a lot of people are now starting to ask questions around the Lou op, because so much of it is out there, and researchers just beyond this program now are starting to discover all the inconsistencies for the last 4 years of CIA Lou, and the fact that the UFO field gave him that easy red carpet to go out and just say things and then all those programs referred to him as the UFO expert. So think about it. If you're running for president, and let's talk about president disclosure here for a moment. So Senator Gillibrand and Senator Rubio, they would have to go to you have to go to a constituency, right? So who's the constituency for the UFO file? Well, it's people who fundamentally would be interested in it, would research it, whatever it would happen to be, right? Well, instead, what they did was they created their own fake version of that. They created a fake whistleblower from basically a fake organization. I mean, ATIP existed, but it didn't exist for what they were doing with it. The actual UFO research goes on at a much deeper level. So that's why our guys, like the George Knapp and the Dolans and stuff, giving Elizondo a pass was a joke, because they knew damn well that a program like ATIP was just surface junk. And they didn't go in deep. They didn't ask him hard questions, and nobody on the UFO side did. And there's no structure on the UFO side. As I said, there's no body that accounts for it. It's just a kind of a mishmash, and it's people who aren't so well informed. And I've often said, if people on the UFO side had the deep state knowledge, if they understood, like the researchers on the deep state side understand government assassinations, they understand overthrowing governments, they understand suspending media and all that. Those people, because of how the UFO file is presented, stay far away from any kind of UFO reporting. But the UFO reporters and researchers need that kind of mind for things, because then they won't collaborate with groups like the Central Intelligence Agency to get disclosure, because it's an idiotic premise on its face. But these groups are all what? They're all CIA, right? I mean, the DeLong's partner is Central Intelligence, 25 years, top man, CIA Directorate of Operations. Elizondo's decades of CIA work. I've of course invited him on this show to debate as a gentleman's debate. He can come out here anytime and explain his story, but he won't. Because I'll just ask him difficult questions, and that'll be the end of the operation. So it's a problem, really. They have a problem for anyone who'll ask real questions. So they have to just navigate this through mainstream media sources who are either told to ask softball questions or don't know any better. A lot of them don't know any better. Or on the regular side, of the alternative side with the UFO researchers, you should be able to have an actual UFO program sit down Lou Elizondo and ask him these questions. What years were associated with the Central Intelligence Agency? During that time, was it your job, as Dark Journalist has said, he has witnesses, that your job was actually to interrogate UFO abductees? Well, I have witnesses to that effect. Is that true or not? Well, if you go back into Elizondo's past, in fact, a lot of his, strengths and experience come from interrogation. That's what he was all about. So you can see we have a lot of problems when we get into this. I love this picture, by the way. It's, if elected president, Hillary says she'll reveal the truth about UFOs. It's true. All right, I have more to get through here, but I think it's best if we go to your questions and then we can roll them both in together. So it's up to you, Miss Olivia.
I'm going to start with softball myself. Patricia Blue says, how do you manage positive outlook with widespread corruption everywhere you look?
Well, it's a good question for the ideas drum, for sure. We do have a lot of widespread corruption. And I think at times in history, it's always been that thing where we understood there was corruption, like central banking or politics or whatever it was. But I think the public kind of winked at it and we're just like, oh, it's human nature, we'll get through it, etc. Problem is, through the technological advances and the consolidation of power in these industries, those groups at the top have decided to consolidate to try to control the entire globe through a global dictatorship. And as a result of that, we're seeing these things that we haven't seen before on a level we haven't seen before. In terms of attitude, look, from the rubble of the system that they're unraveling, we have the ability to create something much better. So, there is that possibility. It seems to me that the more it gets exposed, the weaker that it is. So even a conversation that we're lucky enough to have right now here in the Ideas Room has that effect. It has that after effect, that ripple through the system, that when a number of people get this, it changes the electromagnetic nature of the thing. And then what's interesting also to consider is it changes the conditions and the choices that are available. That's the weird thing. So when your consciousness changes around things, the choices change. So there's a number of things in play, and luckily we've had groups like the mystery schools leave a lot of those things out there. Anthroposophy, theosophy, the Casey work, the Gurdjieff work are guide stones, along the way to give us some ability to navigate the most difficult societal collapse that's ever been recorded. So here we are right in the middle of it. And I think that we could be looking at Earth changes developing at a rapid rate. That is large-scale earthquakes, floods, and things of this nature. That could be the era that we're going into. And it may explain the haste to which, these kind of elite-style groups have been operating to get everyone under one whip, whether it's a medical whip or a financial whip or a UFO whip. They may know as well that these things are coming. And certainly they were foreseen very early on that we were in an Earth changes period. So here we are.
David Frank, DJ, if you had the X-File in front of you right now, what would you do with it? Let's pretend it's a type of math that combines normal and quantum physics.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. Look, the X technology is inside the UFO file. I've pointed this out before. The X technology may come out of something like Tesla's work. He may have discovered how that X technology works. We're talking about, a completely different order of energy. So part of the fear around the X technology and the UFO entry into the popular consciousness is something I've called apotheum on the show, where these groups that control things on the inside, the X-Protect groups, they're afraid of apotheum. Apotheum is an aspect of the X technology that is unpredictable because it upsets the laws of physics as we understand. So, for example, when UFOs come into our world, they upset things. They upset the magnetic field. Power plants get turned off. People walk through walls. People get floated up in cars. I mean, the laws of normal physics don't apply. So this apotheum, which is a term I've given it now, which seems appropriate, is the thing that is the most guarded part of the UFO file. I don't believe just alien life is the thing that they're guarding on the X-Protect side. I think they're guarding the technological advantage that they can get from this, but also from the larger understanding. There's a fear of this apotheum aspect. So I guess to answer the question, anytime we have that kind of advanced technology, it would move the culture forward on a dramatic scale. So if we had adopted Tesla instead of Edison, ultimately, we'd be a much more evolved society. You wouldn't have all those battles over the environment or gas-guzzling cars or switching the paradigm. They wouldn't be engaged in saying, oh, resources are scarce, So we took a real bad turn, but now here we are rediscovering Tesla and the real truth around this. So our consciousness is waking up. But if you go into the mystery school work, they go way back in time. They suggest that the ancient Egyptians had that totally advanced technological innovation. That's something in our own minds, which is an even bigger disclosure, as it were, because the UFO file aspect is a huge disclosure, but our own history of advanced technology and spiritual consciousness intersecting with that technology is a big, big human mystery. So this thing does get into science. It does get into magic. And it certainly gets into something even as basic as geopolitics. Just look at all the things that are going on in the hot zone. And, you know, I found a story about the hot zone recently, very striking, which was that Russia said, look, you know, if this situation continues, we're going to place armaments in Cuba. So we're right back to 1962. There's something about Cuba that they're trying to protect there, but nobody's talking about it. Why do the Russians want to be in Cuba again? So, you know, this is why the things that we address on this program, and when we talk about the hot zone, that relates to that area between Bimini, the Bahamas, and the western tip of Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula, off the coast of Florida as well. That whole area is under a gigantic non-disclosure agreement for people seeing what? Ruins under there. So also for those magnetic studies, the T.T. Brown episode that we just did, something unusual about all these different areas on the globe. And one of the things I think the X series can give us is a different map for things. You know, very often in the alternative side, you get one map. It's like, here's Area 51, here's the Bermuda Triangle, and here's Samaria, you know. And so one of the things we can do is really change that map to give us a totally different X geography about what's actually taking place. And the hot zone is a huge piece of that. Yes.
Twilight Mist, question for DJ. Do you think there is info in the UFO X-File that reveals the nature of humanity and reality itself that allows for us to, quote, ascend like a UFO does energy-wise? I'm thinking of the Merkaba techniques.
Oh, that's a totally different level to think of it on. There's no question about it. Well, let's think about it. The CIA is engaged in psychic studies on record. So those studies included remote viewing, of course. They involve the projection of consciousness. That is, remote viewing is taking your consciousness, placing it somewhere else, and viewing the circumstances that are going on there. In Ingo Swann's work, those programs took him to remote view the moon, where he saw an awful lot of activity going on. So the nature of reality, you know, if we think about the Casey work, we're talking about the mystery schools of bringing that in here, he could project his own consciousness to go to another place to medically assess someone with his consciousness. So he's sitting in an office in Virginia Beach, person who's a businessman in New York wants a reading, he goes into a trance reading and his consciousness goes and has a psychic diagnosis of someone in a remote location. So what's the name for that kind of science? You know, Steiner called it spiritual science, right? It's a entirely different level of understanding. So, but certainly he did thousands and thousands of successful readings doing that. So he proved it. There's many more that have, but Casey was exceptional in that sense. He's our best modern example that this exists. So the CIA studying that and the level that they've got to with it, I think is well documented. And so the question is, that interface of psychic experience with the UFO file is a key piece of all the things that we're discussing here. And you can't just discuss the UFO file and say, oh, somebody saw a UFO. There's an advanced ship from another world just flying around. Isn't that interesting? There's a whole set of different things involved with the UFO file. And a lot of it has to do with this altering of consciousness when those things are around. So the apotheum thing, the distortion of the actual physics field. You know, we talk about torsion physics, which our friend Dr. Farrell, who's recovering now, says makes atomic energy look like a firecracker. You know, being able to understand those types of things, you know, the way that ley lines are set up around the world, magnetic lines, and how they influence and impact people and the involvement of people with that magnetic energy. Does that, you know, those stones have a healing energy? So it transcends so many things on a physical level that it's a transformative experience. So I would say fundamentally, the study of the UFO file is one aspect of that larger search and study. And it's the things that we cover here on this program. Yeah.
Alan the Alien. Daniel, have you ever looked into the Illuminati concerning them not allowing meaningful space progress until after 2070?
I haven't heard this date floated out there before, but certainly I think that they've blocked progress. You know, sometimes don't you ever look around and think, shouldn't the world be more advanced? You know, they talk about, oh, the technology, it's speeding everything up. Well, it's true, but it seems like the aspect, it's because it's being applied in such a base manner. You know, they're trying to provoke fighting online, and they're trying to control what you think and all the rest of it. The first advent, that first wave of technology when it came out, say in the late 90s, early 2000s, had a different quality to it. So, you know, let's keep that in mind, which is the quality itself of the technology in our interface with it. So again, you know, when the mystery schools talk about the early periods of the Atlanteans involving themselves with high technology, they talk a lot about the ability to tune in, to use it, to speak to the outer spheres, that is the saint realm. So that's the equivalent of like opening up your laptop and talking with an ascended master. You know, that's what they were using the technology for. So, you know, it has a practical aspect. It has a spiritual aspect. It can have whatever you put into it, really. But it can also be used to denigrate and downgrade a population as well. So it's a tool. And so we allow ourselves, you know, with that tool to start to size up where the ethics of the thing is involved. And the idea of tech companies tracking you and trying to use your data as a way to control you is such a misappropriation of the advanced things that we've discovered. But it, again, it's a very small group that wants to be able to do that, and mixed in with that group is another group that wants to move the culture forward. It's the same thing around the UFO file when we talk about X-Protect and X-Share. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show, going deep tonight on UFO Neocons and the strange marriage of the Gillibrand Rubio types, just like the strange marriage of Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo. We're taking your questions here, and I want to remind you to go to the darkjournalist.com website to sign up for our newsletter. That's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch with each other beyond any kind of social, you know, shenanigans going on, and the incredible censorship that we've been watching. Of course, I mentioned at the outset of the program that they took down an interview I had with Millennial Millie, the InfoWars reporter who's moved on from InfoWars and has done these really great documentaries. And, you know, that's an interview that we did with her a year ago, but they just take it out of existence, and, you know, some standards thing. So I guess we'll have to take her back on and see what happens.
Ready?
Yeah.
Scarlet Fire. DJ, is COVID an ops failure because it brings the world's consciousness together, the opposite of its intent?
Somebody messed up on their side of it. And I think that, you know, if you watch the beginning of the Iraq War, it's like that too. They thought with shock and awe they'll just take over and that'll be it. Instead, they got into a huge quagmire. And it's the biggest foreign policy disaster in American history, mixed with Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan, where they left them hundreds of billions of dollars of advanced weaponry. And it was one of the most humiliating withdrawals for America. So, you know, we have to look at it and really sort of figure out what the nature of these things are all about. Because, you know, when you look at the operation around the COVID piece, it's meant to engage. They've tried it with different things. We had the financial coup d'etat in 2008, consolidated a certain amount of control. You had 9/11, created the terror economy. It created Homeland Security. You've got 250,000 employees in Homeland Security. I can't even believe it as I say it, that a democratic, you know, republic would have a Homeland Security force with 250,000 employees. But So these things are stages in the creation of a global dictatorship. But on the American side, we can definitely see it's been difficult for them. It's been easier, like the international disaster and the incredible situation in Australia, which I've said is an emergency, and all countries should work to free Australia from the oppressive dictatorial powers that are being put on those people, put in camps and all the rest of it. Like wave from the window and we'll throw you an Amazon treat. Seems to be their solution for everything. So, we're looking at something where across the world, this hasn't worked out for them. On the other hand, all the money's gone to the top during this operation. So those billionaires have become bigger billionaires. And they've been able to say, oh, misinformation, anything that doesn't agree with us is misinformation. So with those types of powers, they have the ability then, without the freedom of the press, to consolidate that operation. But instead, what's happening is people are becoming more and more interested and more thirsty for what's actually happening in the middle of the fact that they're being terrified or their businesses are being ruined or whatever it is. So they run the risk on that elite side with the shock and awe aspect of the COVID operation of actually revealing themselves. So therefore, I think that the shock and awe has worked against them. Catherine Fitz has said she doesn't believe that the COVID op can work for the global dictatorship. And I think a lot of it depends on the level of technology that they have to mind control us with. It seems to me major aspects of their operation have collapsed even at the beginning of 2022. Fauci and his aspect, so many of the inconsistencies, the origin of the whole thing. There's so many pieces of this, but also people living inside of this, the mandates being illegal, deemed by the Supreme Court. Many of the things that they've tried to do to consolidate that power in a fascist manner have not gone as smoothly. But in Canada and in Australia and places like this, you're seeing much more conformity and much more overreach. So it's a very uneven board right now. But my feeling is that the COVID op is a gigantic global dictatorship piece, but the UFO op is really the ultimate emergency threat operation. Yes.
Okay, so the groundhog is having some serious issues here. Where is the documentation that Garrison believed that the assassination is related to the aerospace connection? That documentation does not exist.
Oh, yeah, it does, actually. We've read it many times in this program. It's from the Ramparts editor, and he gave him any of the episodes I've done that deal with Garrison will have this in it. But he gave the editor of Ramparts his breakdown of this, and he said, I need to give you this information because in case anything happens to me, I want you to have it. The Texas oil billionaires are not involved as deep a level as we thought. It was actually the aerospace wing of the military-industrial complex that accomplished the assassination. So that's quoted on record. And, the Ramparts magazine editor wrote a biography, an autobiography that included all this information about Garrison, and it's right in there. It's pretty easy to find, and we've referenced it in about 5 or 6 different episodes. But it's in my documentary, which is called X-Protect, the UFO File, Assassins, and its references is all in there. So, yeah, it's well referenced. Go ahead.
Now, John wants to know, where is Gina Haspel? Is she still missing?
No, she joined a law firm recently. She's still around. And it's like a Democrat power play law firm. So kind of fascinating, her, kind of bloody Gina thing, running the black sites for Bush during the Iraq War, then somehow picking up the role of CIA director under Trump and, convincing him along the lines of the assassination of Soleimani in Iran, which is the kind of sneak attack stuff the United States doesn't do. and there's good reason for it. But Trump was talked into that one with Pompeo, but particularly Gina Haspel told him that was a good idea. And but yeah, a very interesting shadowy figure on the intelligence front. But now we have Avril Haines as the DNI. I think she's really running the show, and that Burns over at CIA is just a hack. Anyway.
Pamela Desbois says, "Where's your red pen? To me, it represents your sword of wisdom, truth, and triumph. It also adds color to your black and white visage. Red pen, please."
It's still here. It's still in action. Yeah, what was I using earlier? Was I using a black pen? It happens.
There are fans of the red pen.
Someone sent me a wonderful red pen, and it was engraved and all this stuff. And I had to tell them immediately that I'll use it. I used it in that one show, but I said, I break pens constantly. Some people break watches. I break pens. So I couldn't use it for any more shows because it's too nice and I don't want to break it. Okay,
so we always get this question. Grant Alexander wants to know, how many different ET groups does DJ think we're talking about here?
Oh, there's a lot. You know, the Transcenders work through Rick Thurston, I think, had the greatest overview of alien groups as alien groups that's out there. Just like the Casey work is the best Atlantis resource. There's other people who talk about Atlantis, and you can have Blavatsky and Steiner talk about it very deeply. But if the Casey work is like a real incredible snapshot of the culture. So just like that, I think that our friend Rick Thurston with the Transcenders, Rick has passed on now, but he left an incredible legacy of work dealing with the different aliens and what they represented, and even this idea of an alien council. So there's an ET factor there. You do have, like in the work of Gigi Young, for example, this incredible understanding of the Greys as an AI extension of humanity on a timeline that failed. And I think that this has to be given, you know, a real deep look, and how innovative Gigi's work is on that front. Because when you look at it, it's a much deeper story than just saying, oh, look, aliens came to visit here. It certainly happens. There's no question about it. But there's something else involved. When somebody is grabbing people and doing tests on them, and, you know, people reporting alien children and all these types of things, that's a much different type of operation. And so I think we need more information, more material to make a determination around something like that. And so Gigi's innovation is seeing that on a much deeper level than just a flat black or white, you know, aliens visiting level. And I think someone like Mac would really agree with that. So in terms of innovation around the question, Gigi Young's work, for sure. Yeah.
I really want to read this. So Zan3119 says, I love you guys' work. After the vaccine, I got heart failure. Now, you guys bring me a lot of peace. Can't even get to my doctor's appointment. Send prayers. Guys, stick together, evil world. God bless you.
Wow. Well, getting through those types of challenges and having the inspiration to go through the physical challenges is, you know, that's as brave as it gets. So thank you very much.
Yeah. And, you know, we have to stick together and we have to keep hope alive. And
no question. Well, I think I've said this before, and it comes to the interactions that we have here in the Ideas Room on the Dark Journalist Show. Just this live interaction we're having right now sends the ripple, you know, and getting into that level of interaction brings us to a different place each time that we do it. In fact, and I'm convinced that's, you know, exactly the kind of conversations that they wanted to shut down during this whole thing about, you know, don't gather together and don't go to church and don't do these things, because when we're together, we resonate and we inspire each other, and that's the death knell for the guys at the top. Yes, what do you got?
Scarlet Fire says there are currently over 1,600 Starlink satellites in orbit, and that number will continue to grow. SpaceX has filed paperwork for up to 42,000 satellites for the constellation.
Oh,
Grant Alexander wants to know, does DJ think Elon Musk is a hero or a villain, or somewhere in between?
Well, you know, I'll tell you, the worst thing about Musk is this Neuralink nonsense and him throwing himself behind the Neuralink. And that is basically like a chip in your head that, you can project your consciousness and all this stuff. And that's his embrace of something that he warned about, which was AI. So apparently they got him on board with some of that. And so I'm not in there with Elon anymore. But I think some of the comments about nuking Mars and stuff like that, it's not a responsible way to approach the type of work. He's a kind of a composite character in a way. He's a set up Howard Hughes. I don't buy all of it. And I think they've just elevated him to the richest person in the world, and they're just playing it out. How does the richest person in the world act? And I think that they needed a better option than Bezos, who didn't seem to have the kind of personal charm to pull it off. And so with his Blue Origins thing, this is the off-world space cult idea, the secret space program. And I think what we're looking at with those people is they're very into cloning, they're very into AI, they're very into robotics, they're very into replacing people with robots. But there's nobody who gets to question them in their decisions. There's no congressional committee that says, should we have robots? Is it ethical to replace somebody's job with a robot just because it's financially ethical? Instead, you hear people bemoaning all this stuff. Oh, everyone needs free access, to this injection, And so they get you rolled into this idea of what charity is or what ethics are, which is totally different. In an ordinary open society, we would have a conversation about, is automation and robotics poised to destroy the things that we understand as a culture? Does it need to be controlled? When they build those mechanical dogs with machine guns on their backs, is that really something that we want to be doing? That level of inhumanity. So those things should all be subject to a congressional committee and a public hearing about the whole thing. What they've tried to do, even if you look at the 90s and the 2000s, you always had talk shows and things that would talk about subjects, and they bring on people, no matter how far-flung, from different ends of the spectrum to discuss things. They can't have those discussions anymore because the things that they're talking about are illogical and unreasonable, but they make sense for the top. And since they've consolidated the money to the top, you have all these talking heads for Pfizer and people like that, Anderson Cooper and all that, and it's all Pfizer money. So you're not getting, these people it's not public television when you're dealing with like CNN or something. Those are paid for puppets. So therefore, the culture's not getting the conversation. So the culture's not growing. The culture is getting stunted and retarding. So therefore, we need to make a move in order to improve the discussion and therefore improve the outcome. And if we don't improve the thoughts, what have we learned from the mystery school teachings? That thoughts are things. If you don't have the right thought projection around the thing, you can't get to that next level. So this is where I think some of those things that were discovered, like new thought and things of this nature, do play a major role. And, I think that they have their kind of, their counterparts that are almost caricatures, like the, what was that thing? The, not The Gift, but The Secret, right? Mm-hmm. And it was just too simple a spirituality, right? It's like, I'm going to project a Rolls Royce. And you can project a Rolls Royce, but to what end, right? But how did you see that?
The Secret specifically?
Yeah.
I think anybody who had done any spiritual work felt that it was too superficial, and
right.
It was utterly simplified and made a huge profit.
No question.
But I think that that's the whole thing with me. I've studied manifestation a lot, and it is very difficult to try to manifest, because it can take a long time, because what you want to manifest most is what is on the other side of a hurdle for you. And you have to climb up that mountain. You have to face your demons, your shadows and whatnot and you have to overcome them to then sort of be on the other side of it, to be in the grace of whatever that is.
Interesting. Absolutely. Wow. Everyone, you heard it here first. That's a good breakdown of The Secret. You're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is episode 117, UFO Neocons. We're going deeply into your questions here in the Ideas Room. We're going to be taking more questions. I still have more here. I thought this one was pretty good. I did mention there's this thing about Rubio that people seem to know he's very blackmailable. So I found this report. It was Alex Jones to Marco Rubio. Go back to your bathhouse. Now that's of course a very Alex kind of insult, but something. But again, people seem to know that there's some blackmailable quality back there in relation to that. And here the DoD announces the establishment of Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group. I'm telling you, it's the annoying name Anomaly.
Mm-hmm.
Anna, that's the name of that group. And Anna's too nice a name for it. Okay, what do you got?
Liddy Lynn, thank you for your amazing work, DJ. Question, has there been any recent activity from the Pope that further clarifies what his role will be in the UFO unveiling?
My goodness, did you already ask me that question?
I asked you that before the show started.
Interesting. Well, the Pope has been promoting a lot of nonsense. And unfortunately, I don't trust this Pope. And I think the Vatican has held back a tremendous amount of information. And I think there's a real hierarchy involved with the information that they dish out. So I don't have a lot of high hopes for that. But for people who, have a deep faith in Catholicism, and I grew up as a Catholic, so I understand so many of the aspects around that. I do think that there's something fundamental to religion and the spirituality that's embedded there if it's executed and done in the proper way. But I also think there's a gigantic machine around, like things like the Vatican Bank and stuff and the scandals that have been involved there, and the deeper fight between the papacy and the Masons that goes on to this day. So it seems to me that there are hidden forces in society around this. And again, even when it comes to the church and the Vatican and the Pope, we don't have anything close to the whole story. The last guy who really wanted to make it happen as a Pope lasted only 30 days because he was poisoned. And that was in 1978 or something. So, there's so much control and so much money involved. I think, again, that when we think of it from its original inception of Christ's ministry and Peter and all the rest, it's gone very far away from that. And I do think that the inspiration that people can have around spiritual identity can revitalize any particular institution. But, really what happens is they say the church is within. And I believe that. Now, when it comes to the Vatican and the UFO factor, it's very interesting because the Vatican went out of its way starting in 2013 to start talking about baptizing off-world visitors and that it's okay to accept UFOs and that's still part of Christ's kingdom and all the rest. And they really went to bat. And then we had this unusual series of meetings with Biden, Stepford Biden and the Pope, and they get together and they start talking about Satchel Paige. And we've gone into detail about the kind of steganography that was being used there because Satchel Paige was used along with the Negro Baseball League, that they would have this entire series of Mars research in 2005, 2006 that would name different places after players in that Negro Baseball League, which is what they called it, the American Negro Baseball League. And they ended up doing that. And so that steganography about Mars and those conversations with the Pope and the strange thing that Biden was doing is talking about Satchel Paige, this ball player from the 1940s, so unusual. And then what happened was in the last month, we've seen the U.S. Mint come out with what? A United Negro Baseball League silver collection with all of these different coins representing it. So something deep is going on with the steganography of space, Mars, the Pope, Biden, and the American Negro Baseball League. Something unusual, very unusual. The episode that I had with Joseph Farrell that got taken down relating to Mars, which we then came back and did live, was all about the human origin story and them discovering ruins on Mars and what the occult significance of that was to the elites. So that origin story of humanity is something that Gigi Young has really been after, with the idea that these groups are trying to change that story. And there's a real innovation there, I think, with her work around this. And we've tried now through these conversations, the shows that we've done on it, our interviews with Gigi and with Farrell, to get a handle on what that is and what they're doing. But the idea may be something along the lines of they're going to announce that they've discovered ruins on Mars, and it's going to set up a different human origin story. And somehow they'll plug themselves in. The Klaus Schwab types will be like, oh, we're the original king blood from Mars or something like that. So there's something involved in that. And I think that they're looking to reassemble the religious picture for humanity, because the way that it stands, people have a too much raw kind of honest spirituality, and they can't have that. That whole spiritual science perspective from Steiner is the Ahrimanic force has to split off the psychological from the spiritual so that people just think about science and forget about the spiritual. They cut off that entire aspect of who they are. And that's crucial for the Ahrimanic forces. Yes.
Where is that episode available?
The episode, well, there's so many. I mean, there's the episode of interviewing Gigi's last interview, of course, dealing with Mars. There's the episode with Farrell that we did on it. So, yeah.
The Farrell one that was removed.
Oh, well, the Farrell one that was removed, we redid it live. So it is on this channel. Then we also, the episode itself was taken down on 3 or 4 different platforms. I think the only platform that still has that episode is BitChute. So it's Dark Journalist, all one word, in BitChute. And we'll do more on BitChute, in fact, going forward. Yes.
Okay, Luke Walker. Does DJ have any thoughts on how psychedelics play into speaking with alien entities? Is it Ahrimanic or Luciferic in nature? Is it something aliens use pre-technological communications?
Wow. Well, the psychedelics thing is so interesting. And of course, I think people like Graham Hancock have done fantastic work on it. And Terence McKenna, of course, he had a real front row seat to what was involved in that. And he tried to bring so much of that philosophy forward. I think there is a lot to it. I don't think that it is a complete system of understanding, and it's not the kind of thing that on a recreational basis I would undertake under any circumstances. But there are entire tribes in the Southwest, for example, that Aldous Huxley used to talk about, these peyote cults and things of this nature. And I think within a structure like that, just like in the structure of certain Native American tribes taking, creating in the shaman the ability to have visions and things like that, is a very different kind of thing than someone just, going on a mushroom trip or something like that. And I don't think that real spiritual preparation and advancement can be had through a plant. I think that it just, is a reminder of deeper spiritual things that in the kind of alpha states that you can get into. But deep meditation, would be the root, the suggestion that I would have from everything that I've seen and experienced. Yeah.
Catherine Harris says it's medicine, not a vacation.
Oh, it's really true.
Important reminder.
Yeah, absolutely. I know people who've had some very interesting insights from doing it, including Graham Hancock, and he shared many of his ayahuasca experiences, and they are fascinating. So again, a lot of it's the intent you go in with, but I don't think it's an actual path for developing that deeper insight, in my opinion, because I think too much of your conscious mind, too much of your own will impulses are suspended when you're under influence. So I'd rather see that come from the inside out. Yes.
I think you need serious protection. And
oh, yeah.
That's really the issue. Speaking from experience.
Really true.
Okay. Jeff Ward, Dr. Farrell's research has Roswell crash as Nazi UFO and not ET. Does Daniel agree with this theory?
Well, none of us were there. I can tell you an interesting thing, though. Obviously, if you've got Lindbergh, von Braun, Einstein, these types of people involved with that crash, and there's accounts of all of them being involved in it, Howard Hughes, then something unusual happened far beyond just, hey, look, some advanced plane came down. So if it was a Nazi, then my opinion, it was a Nazi flying an alien craft. So I do think it's fascinating that after the Roswell incident happens, there's an amazing book that Farrell wrote called Roswell and the Reich about how all of their security files were pulled because they wanted to see what was going on. And there's this idea of an extra state actor or a non-state actor being this post-fascist group, which went somewhere. We know they went to Argentina, but they were operating from somewhere with advanced technology. I think that absolutely happened, and it's related to the work of Hans Kammler and the Bell. That's the incredible insight that we have from Dr. Farrell's work. The Roswell incident is kind of separate from that, in my opinion, because there's so many people like Frankie Rowe and others who witnessed her father, telling her about alien bodies, and there's a lot of deathbed confessions around that. So for me, I think that those are gray aliens in an actual ship that crashed. And I think that it crashed as the result. It looks like it could have actually been two UFOs intercepting each other. We may also have had technology of spotting them at that point and messing around to see if we could interfere with their flight pattern. But certainly the story of Jesse Marcel holds up so many years later. 75 some odd years later. And what did he say that he saw? Well, those I-beams had hieroglyphs on them, some kind of hieroglyphs, and that's very unusual. So I think
I've got a question around that.
Yeah.
So Grant Alexander says, does DJ have any thoughts on the new Roswell hieroglyphs being decoded and said to be ancient script going back to Rome? I was unaware of this.
You hear things like that once in a while. There's also a diary of Jesse Marcel's that's coming out. And there is the revelation from Calvin Parker that when after his experience, he met Marcel. And Marcel said that he still had a piece of the craft that had landed and he had kept it all this time. There's a lot of ramifications from that story. That is, what kind of tests was he doing on it? And he kept it in a basement somewhere in New Orleans or outside of New Orleans. So very, he was humble all the way, but he was the top man. And I think his testimony was spot on, and they had made him lie and say it was a weather balloon because it was something that, it looked like it was a UFO that had crashed, and they wanted to zip it up the same way they zipped up the Cape Girardeau UFO in 1941. They were a little bit better at it by 47 and wiping out any trace of the witnesses and all the rest. There's also this story of a very unusual story about a water commissioner seeing this huge wreckage and stopping, and then a group of archaeology students coming up, and then the military showing up. That's the Roswell story that came out as well. And the water commissioner is the one who told the story, and people remembered it and picked up on it. And the military said, don't ever mention this. And the other thing is that nobody's ever come forward from the archaeology group, but they were probably so petrified by the military that they wouldn't have. But I always found that story very fascinating. And what he saw was half of a crashed saucer and 3 aliens on the ground. Sounds to me like a really good eyewitness testimony. So therefore, the Roswell incident as an actual alien craft makes sense to me. Yes.
The Greenbird says the CIA has unlimited budget and answers to no one. What could go wrong? And SSCTD said, if Orson Welles could do it with a radio broadcast, don't you think that Green Screen Joe and his handlers could do it with all the resources they have?
That's the scary thing. They're getting into this area with Stepford Biden where it's impossible to hide. And when they get to that, it's disturbing because what are they going to do? They put this guy in office who couldn't handle it. They've been controlling him like Spock's brain, and it's not going really well. So, their next move or what they might do in relation to Stepford Biden, is very concerning to me. I also think the fact that Fauci in his testimony saying, when Rand Paul is questioning him, raising this idea that like, people are after me because of your comments. So that means anyone who questions, you can't question anything. So they might stage something like a false incident where, oh, how terrible, anybody who questions anything is a terrorist because look, they've gone after Fauci or something. I mean, this kind of stuff is, they're in desperate throes on that side, on the political end, when the people who like them are saying they're at 32% in the polls, I mean, that means they're actually more like 20%. And those types of numbers are reserved for Herbert Hoover during the Depression and Richard Nixon on his way out of office, and maybe Carter at the very end was a little better than that. But that's the bottom of the barrel. You're on your way out. So he's lasted 1 year, and he's done a terrible job. He's mismanaged the economy. He's mismanaged our foreign policy. He's tried to roll in fascist mandates. I mean, what are they going to do with this guy? He's incredibly unpopular, even among his own Democratic crowd. So it is, I think you make a good point, which is, what are they going to do?
What do you think they're going to do?
As like I just said, I think that they're cooking up a way to make his vulnerability an asset. So how that's going to manifest.
You really don't see you don't see him exiting?
I never thought that he would make it through the full term. I don't know what they're planning on doing with him in the short term. It's something we're going to have to keep our eye on. But an interesting, very interesting piece. I wanted to mention a couple of quick things. Of course, we mentioned that Trump had launched the Space Force. The Space Force, if it is president disclosure, it could become very important in 2024 because, this would be the outfit that they would attempt. What they were going to try to do was run the threat aspect through the DoD, and the Space Force being part of that, but exclusively set for space. It gives the power back to the executive branch. So what we're looking at, I think, with the Space Force is watch for attempts by the Biden administration to neuter or disassemble the Space Force completely. They've already shown it not a lot of support since they launched it. They're concerned with the UFO threat operation. If they have too many people honeycombed from the threat, from the Trump administration inside of the Space Force, then they can't use it because their threat aspect will get called out as a CIA operation. So we'll see more marginalizing of that Space Force as we go forward. Yes.
Najat Madri, does DJ think there will be a State of the Union address this year?
Well, there'll be an State of the Union address for sure, because I'm going to give that one. No, the real State of the Union. Well, he avoided it last time, and he had a lot of excuses. It's hard. I don't think that he can give a full speech. So I think that they might try to do some kind of remote claptrap like they did last time. And so I think it's a very good question, and it's a real, it's like taking the temperature of where they're at with him, because at this point, I think his ability, I've told you about these rumors that during the campaign, he came up here, and that at MIT, they were working on a drug called Storm for Alzheimer's patients. And the drug would send a series of electrical impulses into the brain, and the person would act normal for a while, and then they would go back. I don't know if he's taking that drug, but it does seem to me an incredible, he goes around that wheel completely of acting kind of semi-normal to being completely out of it. And it makes me wonder. It really makes me wonder if Storm isn't involved. Yes.
Steve Bosco, does DJ have any thoughts on Nibiru, Planet X?
It's out there. It's definitely out there. And I actually think that the work that Sisson did on it was pretty convincing. Oh, by the way, this reminds me. I pulled up a Jim Marrs video interview that I did with Marrs in 2018, and they put a label on it explaining the context of the Anunnaki. That's new. They've done it with the JFK assassination. They've done it with UFO abduction, which is absurd. But now Anunnaki. They've got a new tab for Anunnaki. So I think the way to understand Planet X is that it's something that is just beyond the edge of our solar system. And that if you look into the mystery school literature, and this is something that Dr. Farrell does cover in Giza Death Star series as a hypothesis, but there's an indication that a lot of the Sumerian legends are based around the fact that a planet exploded or was destroyed. And that this whole thing about the Death Star destroying a planet and all that sometime in the ancient past is actually an indication that whoever put that together, the George Lucas group, understood or had heard about this story. So there's something there that if you study the Casey readings, he talks about, if you want to understand the gravitational reality of our solar system, you need to make an allotment for the fact that there was a planet that was destroyed. So the Casey readings, the Steiner readings, all hint at a major secret in relation to our solar system as we understand it. Also, that the planets are schools that we travel through as we have different types of incarnations here on Earth. We go through this cycle of having lives in different energy bodies on these planets, and that they're basically kind of schoolrooms along the way. This is also very fascinating, as is the idea of beings in portals from these different types of things. So the Mars, Venus, Mercury, that whole thing, and its impact on Earth. And again, I can refer you to G.G. Young's work on that, but Steiner's suggestions that in ancient times that the alchemy and the alchemical writings switched the position of Mercury and Venus, and that this was done on purpose. That switch, I think, is one of the keys and one of the great secrets that will be revealed about all this. But I think Planet X is definitely involved, and I think the X-Steganography of Planet X is very telling. Indeed. Yes.
Blue Raven question. Any such thing as white hats versus black hats?
Well, X-Protect and X-Share kind of fall into white hat versus black hat. I think this was imagery a lot of the time that was abused during a lot of the cute style reporting that was going on. And you just heard this over and over again. It was somebody's op trying to say, hey, these white hats are trying to stop it, patriots at the top. But again, even with ops like that, there can be kind of core underlying realities to a lot of these things. I mean, so much of these different ops that use the alien reality, it doesn't mean that there aren't aliens or legitimate things, because illegitimate people or stories float around as a result. The thing can be completely true. So I guess the simple answer is yes. And I would say that there's the group that's involved with trying to move the culture forward, the X-Share, X-Reveal group, is outnumbered by the X-Protect group, but that they both have a very strong handle on the ability to reveal things or conceal things, so that there's a battle behind the scenes going on. And certainly in the Kennedy era, the X-Protect group had the upper hand. And I think we've had periods where the X-Share group has gotten enough out to move the culture in a more peaceful direction. So I would say yes, there are white hats and black hats.
I'm pretty much out of questions.
That's good. That's fantastic. Here's the thing. I want to follow up on Gillibrand, and I want to follow up on the early Kenneth Arnold, if I may.
Please.
All right. Here's the thing that we need to keep in mind. Let's think about what we're talking about for a minute. In 1947, Kenneth Arnold saw this craft. It's very interesting with Arnold because there was a story about a plane that had gone down in Mount Rainier, in that area, and he was looking for it because he was trying to see if he could find this. In that aspect, in that area of the mountains, you find a lot of strange stories about planes or things that people think are planes that went down and they aren't found. And but this one, certainly there was a cargo plane that was missing. So this is how he stumbled into that. Very early on, after he reported his sighting and got all this attention, Ray Palmer, an editor from this kind of Strange Times magazine, calls him up and says, there's a couple of people who've reported to me they had a sighting, and that's the Maury Island case. So he said, why don't you go down there and I'll hire you as a private detective to sort this out. And when he gets down there, he experiences all kinds of interference by the Men in Black types. So what we have to understand is the X-Protect, Men in Black, the UFO Neocons aspect of this was already operational during the first major sighting. All that apparatus was there already. He already had people bugging his room. He already had people calling him on the phone and telling him his every move. And he also had witnesses who he would interview at their house, and he would go visit them and talk to them a few times. And then he would show back up at the house, and the house would have cobwebs and the witnesses would be gone. And, so he was already experiencing a kind of twilight world for investigating UFOs as one of the first people who had sighted one as a professional pilot, which he was. So when we read his book, we understand that the whole Men in Black X-Protect piece, and the fact that the alien material that he goes to pick up and contacts the Air Force about, which has fallen onto this ship, and that's in a few cartons. When those Air Force personnel go to fly that out of there, that plane goes down. So there's already deaths being caused by, making a plane crash. There's already witnesses disappearing. There's already people being threatened by mysterious figures. That's all in Kenneth Arnold's case. With the Maury Island case. That's in the summer of 1947 when the Roswell incident hits. All that stuff is operational. So when we hear about all these Men in Black things after the fact, when we hear about all the cases through the 60s and 70s, and then, when we hear about all the things, Area 51 and all the rest of it, when Arnold first encounters the UFOs and he gives this kind of national press conference about it, he already hits X-Protect. They're already operational. That thing is already there. September of 1947, we have the National Security Act by Harry Truman, which gives the CIA all these powers and the ability to do things and not be prosecuted and all the rest. These things are all related, and they're there. They're enshrined in a series of incidents. we've been battling and walking through that history of the UFO file and the different people who are trying to use that knowledge. So here we are right in the middle of it. And we're coming up to in this 2022, we're coming to a 2024 election where you might have president disclosure. And unfortunately, the same forces that were trying to get Arnold off the trail in 1947 are still completely operational, and they've grown and become more powerful. So the idea of the UFO operation and the idea of the threat op that's what their goal has been, which is they wanted to control the technology, to study it, and then to utilize it for their own gain, ultimately. And, what we have from Werner von Braun and his association with Carol Rosin is his amazing predictions, which have all come true about how they were going to use the threat narrative through these different groups, like the Russians and the terrorists, and then eventually to asteroids, and the final big fake out was going to be the fake alien threat. So this prediction does linger because so much of it has come true, and it's not a psychic prediction. It's just something that he understood with his great knowledge of being the father of our rocket program and also the head of the Nazi rocket program. That's somebody that you do want to listen to for information. So it leaves us in an interesting place, because what we're heading into is the powers that be operating the UFO threat. When we, who understand on the alternative side the UFO field, when we see people coming in who are from the Central Intelligence Agency trying to profit and promote a UFO threat operation, it's a very dangerous situation, and that responsible researchers should call it out and push out the CIA researchers in the field and expose them, because they're a very dangerous group, and at their core, they represent a link back to this X-Protect idea. Not that, somebody who's a misinformation agent would be associated with, the kind of lethal force of an X-Protect group, but that they have these links to what X-Protect is trying to do. And so it strengthens the whole X-Protect idea. And that this group, the X-Protect group, sits directly as an aspect inside the intelligence agencies connected to that shadowy corridor of defense contractors on the aerospace side. That thing, the country has never penetrated what that is. And here we are up to our necks in Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all the rest of it. And on the medical side, Pfizer and all this thing. So we have these corporations, that are doing their best to close in on our experience and control it. So therefore, on the UFO side, I think that we have no choice but to call it out as we see it. Okay, we'll take a couple more questions, and then we're going to wind down this session. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Whew, this is X Series 117, UFO Neocons, X-Protect goes public. President disclosure? Kirsten Gillibrand or Marco Rubio. Take your choice.
Okay. I did not fall off the chair. I shifted in my chair and I hit the mic, so I apologize, everybody. That's what that sound was.
I didn't hear anything.
I know. World change brief.
That's just how good you are.
Aren't Greys the future globalists after they have destroyed the Earth and been underground for generations in their timeline, coming back to do it differently?
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, let's think about that. Here's one possibility, which is the Gray. This is a G.G. Young theory, but the Greys are a projected timeline of humanity, a failed timeline, where we outdid ourselves scientifically and we became AI. We merged with AI and became. She could explain that whole theory much better. But in short, as a result of that, we kind of clone ourselves or merge ourselves into this non-human material. So they are coming back on that timeline and trying to repair a broken timeline that they have, because they got to this ruling place, but they outdid themselves. Now, it is quite interesting that the Greys in appearance don't have any hair, don't have any sexual organs, and they have large eyes, and but they do have certain things in common with us, that they're humanoid. They have hands, although they're different, and their general appearance is very small. So it does seem like they've lost the essence of what it is to be human. So going with that idea, I would say yes would be the answer to that, because it would seem like these elites, if they got their wish, they could merge with machines and get rid of the rest of humanity, and slowly but surely, in their quest for this scientific, what Kurzweil is seeking, that merging with the machines, the ultimate moment, then they lose their humanity, and then what? They're cut off from their spiritual roots. And this is a thing we were talking about Musk before, and when he was talking about I can project my consciousness into a box, and this is what my whole Neuralink interface is all about. It's not true, because your consciousness, and these groups who, people around Musk and Musk himself have interacted with mystery school information. Absolutely. And they understand that physically your endocrine system maintains your consciousness. You can't project your consciousness. It's a co-respondence that goes on between your endocrine system, your consciousness, and basically your psychic organs. So you can't project your consciousness out and then physically, just have it inhabit a box, because it operates, it's interdependent with your endocrine system. And in the Casey work, if you go deep into it, it's the silver cord. It's the pineal, pituitary, and Leydig system. So you can't go off and do this thing that he's talking about. So this idea is very Eighth Sphere-like in its execution, because if you think about the work of Steiner and what he was trying to warn us about, although he said that the Eighth Sphere information came out prematurely and that he was kind of playing cleanup with it because the Theosophist had let it out in a wrong fashion. But that the Eighth Sphere was a sphere that was controlled by harmonic forces. It's a projected sphere. So it's almost like a virtual reality sphere where we think one thing is happening and something else is taking place. The Eighth Sphere is something that we're supposed to project our consciousness into in that system. And that's how we kind of get trapped out of our normal spiritual evolutionary pattern. So if you go into spiritual science, if you go into anthroposophy and you study the Eighth Sphere, you're going to see that so much of what Steiner reads almost sounds like he's reading out of the book from 2022, and why Steiner's truly 100 years ahead of his time. And it might even be the reason why he said, look, if anthroposophy fails and World War I is happening like it is, it'll have a chance again in 100 years. When did he say it? 1919, 1920, somewhere in there. We're right in that window. So we get this opportunity again to wake up to the harmonic illusion force of the Eighth Sphere. And the Eighth Sphere runs deep because it's around us, at all times. But the idea is it's trying to draw your consciousness into it. And so it's your awareness that keeps you basically from falling into that. Things like Neuralink and Musk saying I can project my consciousness into a cube is really, it's esoteric misinformation. And so that's the kind of illness that afflicts these people on that level. So I don't doubt that they could get to a point where they completely clone themselves out of their own humanity, merge into this AI thing, and then somehow attempt to come back and claim it from, human beings who didn't fall into their system.
We've been talking about doing a time travel episode. Can we do it next time?
Well, it's interesting because it's coming up.
Okay.
It's coming up, and it's integrated into one of my favorite subjects. But of course, even the Thomas Townsend Brown episodes get into time travel. That's the way that we can come into it, because otherwise it's anybody's game, which is that's always fun. Okay, yes.
A cult fan. So why does it feel like these UFOs waited until after World War II to really start making their mark on our public consciousness?
I've thought about that a lot, actually. But there's a whole study that comes out of our friend Mussolini that he had done, which was all about the UFO file in the 1930s. So they were already studying this in the 1930s. You go back a little bit further, there are references directly in several novels that sound exactly like UFO encounters. You have the airship mysteries, of course, in the late 1890s, well covered, and that is an aspect of what we're talking about. But it is true, there's something that happens in 1947 that changes it. And the whole perception around it's changed. And Arnold steps forward, and the Roswell incident happens. Somebody, a number of researchers actually have tracked these sightings that have taken place and thought, well, maybe there's some relation to the Roswell incident and the Maury Island incident. Well, what's really even further interesting is that if you really dig into it, there's another incident that happens in Arizona in the same window as well. That also sounds like a craft out of sorts or in trouble. So it could have been a confluence of influences. It also seems to me that something that gets pointed out a lot in relation to Crowley and the Parsons experiments in 47, opening this portal and then pouring through, it has to be looked at that they could have been around the surface, and that things like Cape Girardeau and things. If you go into the Cosmos Club episodes, you'll find that the person who founded the Cosmos Club had spent 5 years during the Civil War in Cape Girardeau. Did he learn about alien activity in Cape Girardeau? Is the Cape Girardeau craft crash from 1941, which I think is very well supported, and Harry Truman was senator at the time, quickly becomes VP, then president. But is there a geographical reference in the Cosmos Club? Did they discover an older crash there? So there are threads there that are important that have nothing to do with 1947. But 47 seems to be that window. And I think that the great expanse of that window, a lot of people say, well, we released the atomic bombs and that's what happened. Well, it's true, but the atomic bombs were dropped in 45 and there's no wave in 45. So the atomic bomb...
You had Foo Fighters, though.
Oh, true. The Foo Fighters were throughout World War II. And, it's true that some of the astronauts who had been through World War II said, hey, they would fly in formation just like we would. Gordon Arnold had that. So, I think it is Gordon Cooper talked about this. So the Foo Fighters, again, seem to be something that they're fascinated that humanity has got to this level of flight again. But if you go back and read what I think is a very occult biography by Lindbergh, it's a very occult moment when he's flying across the Atlantic and he hears all those voices that are egging him on. And that's not just a psychological instance. He's hearing discarnate entities or spirits of the air. There's a lot in that for when we start to go into the air again. The Delschow paintings and all that. And I think that this is absolutely crucial, which is the German artist Delschow creating that huge airship idea, and then it's saying Trump 45 in the middle of it, and Trump being the 45th president. I mean, that's remarkable, if you think about it, especially since the Trumps were probably part of those early airship groups. And I think that, guys like Bosley who study NIMSA bring out some of those aspects about Delschow. It was written about before, but I think that this is an interesting way to go into those early airships. So we have a lot of material there to work with. One more question.
One more question. Well, this is a really intriguing question. I don't know anything about this. Najat says, could the UFOs be coming out because they have the crown jewels that Dr. Farrell wrote about in his McCarthy books? With those jewels, was something summoned? Do you know about these jewels?
Yeah, well, Farrell has a very interesting idea that once we opened through the action of not creating a nuclear blast, but the action of the nuclear fusion attracted the interest. And I think, Farrell is always incredibly original around this. And again, I think there's a book of his, I think I have it here, but it makes references directly to T.T. Brown and the UFO File. And I think this is the book that there's two books where Farrell in 2014 and 2015 kind of foreshadows so much of the UFO things that we're going to see. And so I think that's a really a big one to ponder. A couple of quick pictures here. That is Kenneth Arnold's in the center there during those early periods. There's not enough pictures of him. He's a very interesting guy. And when he did an interview in 1984 before his death, he was still going over how much interference took place in him trying to research the sightings that he had. So there was already intense interference taking place on a level. I wonder what they were planning on doing with him. That's a shot of Vannevar Bush, who physicist Robert Sarbarker told us was in charge of the UFO File. There he is with Truman. And now let's remember that Van Bush here was a most worshipful master for the MIT Masonic Lodge. And so his understanding of secrecy as a result of that is just, off the charts. Finally, I'm going to read from the Torbit document something that's kind of important relating to the DISC group. William Torbit, again, the kind of 1970 WikiLeaks, puts this out and gives us that hint about what Defense Industrial Security Command, DISC, was. Quote, the DISC was a police, security, investigative, intelligence, and employee clearance arm of the sprawling military-industrial complex consisting of the Atomic Energy Commission, NASA, the munitions makers and suppliers of the Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps, and the employees of all of those agencies and those companies who held contracts with them. It is not in the least surprising that the syndicate and the mafia worked well into the Defense Industrial Security Command because of their members' ownership in many of the huge corporations manufacturing munitions, supplies for the Pentagon, Atomic Energy Commission, and NASA. So I think that we really get a handle on this, exactly how the mafia became involved in just a complete enforcement arm of the Central Intelligence Agency. We had used them in the Italian elections in 1948 to supposedly make sure that the communists didn't get in. So that relationship with the CIA on record with the mafia starts in 1948, but then we start using them for assassinations. Eventually, the CIA tries to use the mafia as a fall guy in the Kennedy assassinations. It doesn't fly because, the mafia, although they can supply assassins, they can't cover up records, change autopsies, and do all that. So that's all inside job on the Central Intelligence side. Nice try, but no, it's not going to work. And then finally, let's see here. After 2 years of intense and extensive investigation, Jim Garrison, the DA from New Orleans who investigated the Kennedy assassination, made a well-recorded public statement showing beyond doubt that he had traced the Nazi rocket scientists, the World Trade Center, and Permindex, the fascist Solidarists, American Council of Christian Churches, and gambling syndicate for the mafia, and NASA's security division into its umbrella controlling organization, the Defense Industrial Security Command, in Columbus, Ohio. What else do we know that's in Ohio is Wright-Patterson. Garrison had traced DISC into its larger umbrella, Division 5 of the FBI and the Defense Intelligence Agency supervised by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Pentagon. Here's how Garrison's statement came about. On October 31st, 1968, Jim Garrison subpoenaed a Tacoma, Washington man for questioning on his continuing investigation of the Kennedy assassination, Fred Lee Chrisman, who we've covered on this program. He was called to appear before the grand jury on November 21st. Garrison's office said that Chrisman had been engaged in undercover activity for a part of the industrial warfare complex for years. His cover was that of a preacher. Garrison's statement continued, our information indicate that since the early 60s, Chrisman had made many trips to the New Orleans and Dallas area in connection with his undercover work as a former employee of the Boeing Aircraft Corporation, in the sense that one of the defendants in the case is a former employee of Lockheed Aircraft Company in Los Angeles. In intelligence terminology, this ordinarily means that the connection still exists, but that the former employee has been moved into an underground operation. That gets real close to X-Protect. Garrison was that close. And that's why his records continue to be held back. But in dealing with DISC, we get that picture. We're getting closer to understanding exactly what was taking place. And to round it all out, to Gillibrand and such, Gillibrand was, in her own press releases, touting all of these things in relation to aerospace companies, inviting the aerospace companies. This one is the Laurentian Aerospace Company to break ground on Plattsburgh facility in April. And this was a small aerospace company that was in New York, and she was inviting to grow this entire aerospace. She was seeding the whole thing. Following years of support for the Rome Air Force Research Lab, Kirsten Gillibrand announces designation of the AFRL as the Quantum Information Science Research Center for the U.S. Air Force and Space Force. Senator Gillibrand, excuse me, it's getting late. Senator Gillibrand today publicly announced that the Air Force Research Laboratory has been designated as the Quantum Information Science Research Center for the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Space Force, and it's in Rome, New York. That was that whole thing. So Gillibrand, deep, deep, deep in the aerospace edge, and oddly enough, and I'll get into this in next time, the companies involved with her early action towards getting aerospace into New York City and to New York State involved these Latter-day Saints people defrauding those companies and getting actually sent to prison over it early on in 2011. In this case, former Latter-day Saints stake president pleads guilty to scamming $1.5 million from church members. Former Salt Lake councilman and Latter-day Saints stake president Eric Jurgensen was convicted of conspiring to defraud an aerospace company of $2.5 million. New York jury returned the guilty verdict. That case is the same company of Laurentian Aerospace. And there's a big Mormon money scam going on here. And I'm sure there are many Mormons out there who are horrified by that. I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with the Mormons, but the Mormon people and the Mormon groups and the way they operate are totally different than people who just believe in the Mormon philosophy. So there's a huge CIA control pattern throughout the Mormon church and throughout their activities. I believe that some of the early attempts of Gillibrand to bring the aerospace companies into New York and all these Mormons showing up are directly related to the fact that Rainier is deeply involved in Mormonism. Then this is the same person, Indian American jailed for conspiring to defraud company of $2.5 million. It's the same company. So New York-based firm Laurentian Aerospace Corporation has retained Verdant to raise funds for the construction of an airplane maintenance, repair, and overhaul facility to be built at the former U.S. Air Force Base in Plattsburgh, New York. it's all the same story, and it's got this weird Mormons defrauding this aerospace company. I can feel that there's a bigger story in there, so I'll be bringing that one forward. And finally, I wanted to end the show with a couple of shots of Lou in a different guise. This is Lou. Now he has the guise of, the whistleblower and all the rest. Well, here's Lou, a successful businessman, never ship empty, 2010. What's interesting about that shot is Lou was supposed to be where in 2010? Running ATIP. Well, here he is running a shipping company in Maryland. Doesn't seem to be running ATIP at that point. Well, what was he doing before that? I've suggested he was chasing down and interrogating different abductees who had encountered UFO experiences. And I've gone on the record with that. I'd like him to go on the record that wasn't part of his past, because I think it certainly shapes things in a different way. But there he is as an interrogator in one of those Middle Eastern countries doing his CIA interrogation work. So this guy has a lot of different faces, and his latest face is GQ hero for releasing UFO information. Well, Dark Journalist doesn't buy it. So maybe he can prove it to somebody, but he always has an invitation to come on this program and do it. But it doesn't seem like he's ever going to take that invitation. And given who his handlers are, I don't blame him a bit. Everyone, thank you for joining us. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
This has been an amazing ideas from chat tonight. So
Yes.
You're going to have to actually really go through it. And I'd love to invite everybody to contribute to the comments section
Yes.
and have lively debates with one another, because I think you'd really enjoy it.
Yes.
So we have a lot of super chatters to thank. Gil and Joy R, Linny Lynn, Erica Swenson Elliott, Daryl Dothero, Bill Gometz, Jesse CT6, Global Atlantis, Samuel Dawes, Donald Smead, Doreen Hewitt, Mad Max, Jim Sarge 3ID, James, a cult fan, Mark Petrie, Ho Boo, Stephen, Daniel Hinckley, Eurythmia's Fun, Roosevelt Media News, Anoni Mouse, Larry Backlund, Peter Rabbit, Anthony Tormina, Rasterman the Seer, Jerry Beck, Brian Berner, Vanessa Fimbres, Cursacella, Luke Walker, Alan the Alien, Aiden, PRBR, Raymond Lee Harvey, and the Cove channel was incredibly generous. Thank you so much.
Remarkable. We really appreciate your support. It helps us to do the incredible work out here for you and makes things go a lot better. So thank you for your support. And to all our subscribers and contributors, we really genuinely appreciate it. And we'll be bringing you very deep reports for 2022. And I'll do a couple of shout outs.
Sure.
Did you have anything else?
Melanie Kay said the movie Soylent Green is set in the year 2022, so maybe they will concentrate on screwing up our food totally this year. I think they've already started
Soylent
that.
Green, but the thought I was thinking about Omega Man, actually.
I love Omega Man too.
We could be heading more to Omega Man, in fact. And the question is, will everybody do the white eyes? Taj Jacobs, Johnny Parker, Scarlet Fire, Fubar Fighter. It's great to see you out there. Woo! Frank Monday, a cult fan. Put DJ on the cover of GQ. I like the way you're thinking. Love you, DJ. Thank you very much. Catherine Harris. Oh, that's right. I can do this now. I forgot. There we go. Roosevelt. It's great to see you, sir. Thank you for being out there. Thank you, Bo. Astro Sam. Lots of bookshelves. Soylent Green is people. That is really the quote of the night right there. Is that your quote for tonight?
What, Soylent Green is people?
Yeah.
Well, they want us, we know that they're, disrupting meat. They don't want us to actually have meat. So, and they're talking about insects. I mean, it's just a matter of time, because what is the word that they use in Soylent Green? It's expedient.
But what do you think? They used to promote meat. Where are they going now? This is very interesting.
They want us weak.
Very, very interesting. I absolutely agree.
With no testosterone.
I like someone says, DJ Sharp Dresser. Thank you, Traveling Riverside Blues Johnson. The blues is always good. Catherine Harris. I'll try the crickets. Yes. Make my cricket not too well done. Thank you.
Actually, they have chocolate-covered crickets or grasshoppers. Ants,
What is
I know
the
they do
book
that.
on the table? Oh, that book? I will go back here, and you know what it is? It's one of my favorite books of all. It is JFK and the Unspeakable, which is James Douglas, Why He Died, Why It Matters. Incredible, far-reaching, goes into all the deeper aspects of this whole thing. I don't want any gooey stuff. There we go. Wow. Thank you, AAA Beverages. Maggie Smith, Tristan Stevens. Fantastic. What a great crowd tonight. Unbelievable questions in the ideas room. Bethany Green, terrific to see you. I know Kate's out there. I saw Gigi earlier. Mike Pamone. Have that book. Yeah, it's remarkable, isn't it? Good night, kids. Good night, Najat. Excellent. Excellent work. Who did that? Jack. Adam Riddle. Karen Carpenter. Amazing. Excellent group tonight. I wonder if I can highlight that.
DJ, have you ever done a show on the Collins Group? You actually never have. It's come up as a question.
Yeah, it's a good point. A more complete version of the Collins Group show would be really fantastic. And we definitely will look into doing that as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. A couple more shout outs. Kat Goida, of course. Excellent. It's great to see you out there. Gigi Abby Lynn, thank you so much.
Can you put a reading list on your website? Dear God, that's a lot of work.
Well, tonight's reading list can be the Torbett document was put out in NASA Nazis and JFK by Ken Thomas. He just republished it, the Torbett document and the Kennedy assassination. What's interesting is the Torbett document called itself The Nomenclature of an Assassination Cabal. And that's the full title, but Ken Thomas re-released all of that there. JFK and the Unspeakable. And I already put up the Project Paperclip book. All of those books are incredible, along with On the Trail of the Assassins. What's interesting is, of course, it's Kennedy, very in depth on all those, but Garrison weaving through that information gets you right into the heart of the UFO info, and they don't even know it. That's the fascinating thing. When they encounter the NASA stuff, they don't even know what they've hit on, which is remarkable. Good night, y'all. Yes, howdy from Thailand. Holy, that is fantastic. Richie B, thank you for being here from Thailand. We're so happy to have everyone here. And of course, I always like to promote people out there who are doing good work. I recommend this week Cryptagon.com. And this guy is always collecting very interesting stories on his website. So definitely check that one out. Bruce Ross Morgan, Ross DiCarlo on Twitter. Fantastic. Of course, we interviewed Bruce for our documentary. And so many other good ones. Forbidden Knowledge TV, of course, Alexandra doing a great job over there at forbiddenknowledgetv.net. Or I think it's .com now. She got the .com.
Did she? I think it's still .net.
Okay, fantastic. Gigi Young, go to gigiyoung.com, find Gigi on YouTube, remarkable, way ahead. Of course, Dr. Farrell recovering, GizaDeathStar.com, doing a great job, coming back strong.
Najat mentioned that Catherine is doing a fundraiser for Joseph for his medical bills.
Yeah, I think if you find Solari Report on Twitter, that's probably the best way to follow that. Grant Alexander, fantastic. It's great to see you out there. We will see you all next week. We have a very exciting episode 118 coming up, along with a few surprises, maybe even a surprise between now and then. But have a fantastic weekend, and we'll be keeping an eye on everything going forward. And I know that Martin Luther King Day is coming up, and we should always remember the incredible work of Martin Luther King and the incredible deception around the elimination of King and RFK in 1968. I wanted to mention one last thing, actually, which is that California Governor Newsom denies parole for Sirhan, convicted of the Kennedy assassination, even though the parole group had granted it. I find that interesting, and I think that anyone can have a reasonable disagreement about whether or not to release him after 53 years. But RFK Jr. had actually advocated for his release, since we know now that he didn't shoot. He didn't kill Robert Kennedy. The person who was responsible, as we pointed out in our documentary, was Thane Eugene Caesar, who had fled to the Philippines, who was the security guard directly behind Senator Kennedy that night. And he worked at Skunk Works. Skunk Works is where Lockheed Martin redeveloped the UFO file. And, you know, Ben Rich said, you know, most UFOs are just unfunded opportunities. Think about that. And that'll take us to understanding the whole thing. But Sirhan, certainly there's a lot in there. And if the right person could get in there, I'm sure they could release so much of that information if Sirhan was willing to do it. So I hope that that someday comes to pass. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night out there. We will see you all next week. And Miss Olivia?
God bless everybody.
Yes. God bless. You know, it says end broadcast, but it never really ends, right?
Ever.
Thank you, everyone. Catherine Harris, thank you. Wayne Peak, have a great night. I'm amazed Sirhan is still alive. Good night, everyone.